ladies and gentlemen, I'll call the special meeting and work session for the UDO discussion for August 17th, 2026, 10 a.m. to order. We'd like to welcome everyone here this morning and those who are joining us on the live feed or will watch us later on in the YouTube channel. We're happy to have you here today. Before we move into the regular agenda, I'd like to take just a moment and remember Wilson's Mills Mayor, Fleta Bird. What a wonderful community servant, and she certainly will be missed by many. It's a sad day for all of us, and I will mention it again this evening, but I just really felt that we needed to just take a moment and acknowledge her service to the community and how much she meant to all of us. So, with that being said, I've asked Commissioner Stevens to lead us in invocation, and I'll ask Commissioner Godwin to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and if you choose to join with us, please stand.
Dear Lord, we come before you today and we just thank you so much for another day. Dear Lord, please give us wisdom, patience, and discernment in the decisions before us. As we consider land use and growth, please help us to respect others' property rights and remind us that we are to be the stewards for you and for all that you've given us, Lord. And we just ask that you continue to guide our discussions, to guide our county, and it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Please face the flag. Present arm. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The purpose of today's meeting is just that. It's a UDO discussion among board members and to be able to reach some type of direction for the consultants and staff to be able to move forward with it. This is not a typical meeting where we will have public comments and those type things, but we will have that later tonight when we have our normal meeting. There will be an opportunity once we refine this much more that it will go back out to the public and have plenty of opportunity to review it, and so that the public can have a chance to really dive into it and take a close look, and then there will be another public hearing coming up in the future that they will be able to voice concerns and so forth. So that being said, we do have emails concerning this UDO discussion from Ann Whipple, Constance Godin, Christine Livingston, Panda Crocker, Laura Way, Matt Williams, and Jeremy Norris. And so you have those emails at your desk, and I'm sure you've all already read those and taken those into consideration. So that being said, I will call our planning director up, Braston Newton, to come in. We have our consultants here with us today, and we'll open the discussion on the work session. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Board. Good morning. So we have provided for you each, we have provided a brief, just a list of topics. In the presentation today, we're going to get into the details on those topics. So we're going to jump right on in because we know this is we'd like to get as much discussion in and feedback as possible from the board. So first today, we want to talk about density calculation. Generally speaking, there are really two ways to calculate density as it relates to land use and division of property. So this is going to be a gross calculation, which you take the gross acreage and divide that by the density, or multiply that by the density allowed, and you will get that. Once again, this is going to be a gross number of units allowed. Just a word of caution on calculating density as a whole. The physical attributes of the property, how you're developing the property, what type of infrastructure is being utilized, all plays a role into what the net density ends up being. So here today we're wanting some direction on just how we move forward with calculation of density as either a gross calculation or a net calculation, and what that net looks like if we do migrate to that. Currently today, our UDO does not, or our Land Development Code does not necessarily determine how or does not tell us how we calculate that. Historically, even prior to my tenure with Johnston County, it has been done in a gross manner, meaning if that density is 1 unit per acre, you have 100 acres, your gross density is 100 acre or 100 units. So essentially what we're asking is how the board wants to treat this and move forward. There's been discussions among stakeholder groups and the community, and there's really no consensus there. And how we do net is the other question. Is this a net buildable or net usable or net developable acreage? Removing what type of or features of the land, of the property from the gross to get that net buildable area. So as you will see on screen, we do have some verbiage here as the proposed UDO definitions, meaning density and gross acreage. And net acreage here is, it refers to a portion of the land that is available and suitable for development, excluding areas to be developed or are required to remain undeveloped, including but not limited to public right-of-ways, existing railroad right-of-ways, jurisdiction waters, wetlands, floodways, conservation easements, and other environmentally constrained lands, as well as dedicated land or land dedicated for public facilities where development is prohibited. There is some language there where the administrator
Excuse me,
of the
Brad.
ordinance. Yes, sir.
Didn't, several years ago, when we moved from an average number of units per acre to a minimum of 30,000, didn't that at least imply a net acreage or work toward a net application?
Not necessarily. So what you're referring to is we had a general density calculation or density threshold, which was 1.5 units per acre. So it looks a little bit different today. There was no lot size minimum. So
Right.
if it's 1.5 units per acre, I have 100 acres, that's 150 units on that 100 acres. Today, if that property is not in an environmentally sensitive area or water supply watershed, as per overlay, as per our ordinance, then it's a 30,000 square foot minimum. So that would be your gross. You take the 30,000, or divide whatever that acreage is by that 30,000 number, and then it's going to be the gross number of lots or the number of lots. You may be allowed, once again, physical attributes of the property is going to determine what that net yield.
That could limit it.
Yes, sir.
But bottom line is that while that is a theoretical maximum you could put on there, you still got to be able to physically site the houses on there and provide all the necessary design features and stormwater management measures, et cetera, to ensure that it's going to be compliant, environmentally compliant.
Yes, sir, that's correct. That's correct. It plays a larger role, excuse me, it plays a larger role when we're talking about septic development versus public sewer. Septic development is going to be soils dependent, the soils conditions. So, yeah, that's going to play a larger role here.
All right, well, we're largely talking about septic issues here in the county because we don't have the capability to provide sewer throughout the county.
That's
So,
correct.
I think that's a critical point to have in there. This really came up, I think, from the standpoint that there was a big project near Smithfield that was, I think about 400 acres of the site was wetlands, and about 600 acres was truly buildable land, but the developer was saying, well, our density is only X. You're divided by a very large number, but it was really misleading as to what the true density on the site was. And I think that's the concern, that it's a misleading number, but I'm sure it has legal ramifications that have to be considered.
Yes, sir.
It would be helpful to understand what those legal ramifications are that drive us toward continue to use gross versus using some figure like buildable acreage. I mean, do we have anybody from legal that can address that?
We certainly do, yes, sir. Chad Essick with Pointer Stroll is here.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be helpful to us if we could hear the pros and cons from a legal standpoint of why gross would be advantageous over some type of net or buildable acreage density calculation.
Good morning again, Chad Essig with Pointer Sproul. So as you're all aware, the General Assembly passed some legislation dealing with downzoning. One of the definitions of downzoning is decreasing the development density of the land to be less dense than was allowed under the previous usage. So the question here, as I understand it, is that the current development ordinance does not really define how you calculate density. It just defines what density is. But my understanding is historically that's been done on a gross acreage calculation. And so from my perspective, moving to a net density calculation would come with some legal risk if historically the county has done it on a gross acreage calculation. But there is some ambiguity since neither term is currently defined in the UDO. But I think as a practical matter, there could be some legal arguments made that now you're calculating it differently than you did under the prior ordinance, and that constitutes less density than was previously allowed. So that's my assessment of the risk associated with it.
Is it also your opinion that this does not in any way affect what we've already got stipulated as minimum lot sizes out in rural areas? 30,000 square feet and 40,000 environmentally sensitive watershed areas?
And that's not changing under the current draft, correct?
No.
Right. So no, that's not an issue.
Okay, so that's the ultimate governing factor here in terms of how many units you can put on a tract of land.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, that's helpful.
So I did have, in the notes or staff explanation, it says gross density allows for greater flexibility in design and clustering where allowed. So where is the clustering allowed? Because to me, that goes to a smaller lot size than the 30 or 40 that Commissioner
Yeah, so
Stovall.
but obviously, we have built into the ordinance, these, what we're calling paper districts.
Okay.
Because obviously today, we can't impose those, we can't map any of those districts because of the downzoning legislation. So we do have those paper districts. So there are cluster options with some or most of those paper districts. So in areas where the land use plan has identified a higher density of growth in residential development, the developer or landowner could potentially seek rezoning of the property associated with a site plan, and this is going to allow for that clustering. Now, in some situations, they're going to get a density bonus, slightly increased density, but they would have to meet certain other thresholds or criteria in terms of open space, amenities, and things of that nature in order to qualify for that.
All right, so I guess we'll get some vocabulary lessons for me and probably for the public as well. So when you say paper districts, so what does that mean?
So these are districts that are included in the ordinance, and they exist truly just on paper today. They are not in practice, meaning they are not mapped, and they will not be mapped because of the legislation as it's written. Johnston County, as a government or no local government unit, can initiate a downzoning of property without each impacted property owner's written consent. So therefore, it makes it unrealistic to move forward with any type of rezoning, county-initiated or government-initiated rezoning today to do that, just because of the number of properties it will impact, and that's going to take just massive amounts of effort and time. And you may not get the results you want out of it as well. So this would be on a more case-by-case basis.
So would that allow for, maybe say if this ordinance was adopted with the paper districts, for a landowner to come in and say, I would like to opt in to a paper district, or is that off until the downzoning is addressed at the state level?
No, they certainly could do that. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, they could certainly do that. So they can apply for a rezoning. It's being initiated by them with their consent. Yeah, they can certainly undertake that. Yes, sir.
Okay.
While we're on paper districts, I did have a question. So one thing I couldn't quite understand is the reason for, like, for example, the estate, say, what was it, 2 to 5 acres, I think, on that? Because it seems to me as if once you set the minimum, then that's the minimum. The developer, the builder, whatever could build, if he wants to build 12,000 square foot homes on 10-acre lots, then he could. Why would that, what would incentivize any landowner to to go and rezone to this new classification?
So I'll start from the beginning with the land use plan. So during the land use plan development, we had extensive public engagement for that process. The public spoke. The public said, look, we want to preserve as much of the rural character of this county as possible. And we want to focus and drive that development closer to, if not to the municipalities or those existing urban areas where we have the utilities and infrastructure there to provide that or to support that density and that type of growth. That was the result. So it's this estate district, right? Those were put in place. We had those, we already had drafted those and had those in place, had those discussions and talked about that in formation prior to the legislation, the downzoning legislation. It is our advice or our opinion that we should maintain those as paper districts in case of legislation, if that legislation were to change. Just because of if nothing else, the land use plan states that here we want certain areas to remain rural in character and we want to hold true to that culture and that character as much as possible. And the density, we just don't have the infrastructure there to support a higher density anyway.
Preston, thank you. I think it's helpful to try to put this downzoning situation in context. This appeared in a budget bill at the end of 2022 in December. I think it was on the last page of a 600-plus page budget bill, one line, without any context originally or any discussion ahead of time, called all 100 counties flat-footed. They didn't know this was coming. Allegedly, this was done because a local government presumably had overstepped its authority and was imposing unreasonable requirements on a private landowner. So the legislature's solution to this was to basically make all 100 counties subject to this prohibition on downzoning. There was a lot of discussion about it at the county level. There was a lot of counties that were given assurances this was going to be repealed because recognizing you don't use a hammer to kill a gnat. But so far it's still there, and it's probably going to stay there for a while now because the influence in the General Assembly right now are heavily tilted toward the building industry. They're the strongest lobby in the General Assembly. So we don't see a repeal on the horizon, but it basically came up in the middle of our development of the UDO process. And a lot of things that were in our land use plans and how we were planning to basically implement that got called into question about, is this going to be a conflict? Is it going to cause a problem? So a lot of things that we had worked on were put in there, basically just saying, we're going to put them in here as options, but we can't enforce them. And that's why we have these type of districts in there. But the basic premise of the land use plan was citizens very strongly said they want to preserve the rural nature and rural character of Johnston County to the extent that it is feasible and practical. We want to push all development, dense development, toward the municipalities where you have availability of water and sewer. We don't have sewer availability as a rule out in the county, and we don't have the financial resources to do that. We are resource limited in the amount of water we have, as well as the amount of sewer we can discharge into our receiving streams, which is a limiting factor. So we were working on a resource-based model here that would apply our resources to the type of development that has the most advantageous posture for the county. And that kind of got a monkey wrench thrown in it with this downzoning provision. So we're trying to work around that now, assuming that it's not going to be repealed. If it is repealed, that'll give us more flexibility down the road. And I think the general citizen, they need to understand that this is not our doing. It really threw a monkey wrench into everything we were doing here to try to get modern land use rules in place to manage development, manage tax base. A lot of counties are experiencing the same thing or ran into the same problem. Fastest growing county in the state right now is Brunswick County. Johnston County is number 2. We have teetered on 1 and 2 for a while now, but they're all experiencing, counties that are experiencing major growth are all going through this same type of challenges right now.
I had 2 questions, Bryson. So right now, whenever subdivisions are sent to the planning board, you've got, like, the total amount of, it will show, like, total, like, available units, but then it will say how many they can actually have. And so, like, it might say proposed 200, but then allowable density of 300, but then proposed 200 because of the minimum lot size requirement, correct?
That's correct, and a lot of that is driven by the physical attributes of the property, whether are the wetlands in place, riparian features they have to manage or take into consideration, the soils, composition and allowance of adequate design for septic systems.
Right. So if it stays as gross, I'm just trying to make sure, like, trying to put it in what it looks like coming forward and how it can change and look the same or what it does. So if it stays as gross acreage, then that would stay the same, that you could possibly have this amount, but it's actually this amount of houses proposed, right? It would look like the same, or would it be?
That's correct.
And then if it was net acreage, it would just say you can only have the 200 houses.
You would do that net, calculation, removing that net acreage or that net buildable acreage, or that
Okay.
removing the non-buildable or non-developable
Right.
acreage. So that could be wetlands. Keep in mind, you can impact wetlands. You have to get a permit to do so. So that could create additional lands. And if they propose that, then obviously it'd be a condition of that approval. But yeah, that's how that would be calculated.
Okay, so right now, like how we're doing it is pretty much gross acreage when it's coming to the planning board. Okay, all right, and then my second question was, what are like the neighboring counties, like Bill was mentioning, what are Brunswick, Union, Buncombe, Wake, what's in their UDO? Are they doing gross or are they doing net?
It's going to vary.
Okay.
So they already have established some time ago, prior to the downzoning legislation, they have established their own mechanisms or their own methodology for
Okay.
Calculating density. It's not uniform. It's just up to the locality.
Okay.
All right. Any other discussion or conversation on this?
I guess a little help for me again. So under the gross, 100 acres, one house per acre, 100 units you could build. Then whatever the site was, wetlands, conservation easements, right-of-ways, they would have to design around that and say they got up to 50 units on that at a lot per, I guess, an acre per lot. Under the net, they do all this calculation on the front end, and they still come up with the same area and do it that way? What would be the difference?
So currently, if I have 100 acres, and let's say I have 25 acres of wetlands, and if that is removed from that net density calculation and is deemed as non-buildable acreage or non-developable acreage, then they would remove that. Now, you would calculate your density based on the remainder, so that 75. So if that's 75, whatever that, if it's 30,000 square foot lot, that's what your gross still, once again, that would be out of that net land. Your gross yield is going to be that number, that 75 acres divided by that 30,000 square feet, which is roughly 6,900 of an acre. That would be your gross yield. Does not necessarily mean your net yield. Your net yield is going to would be impacted by right-of-way development. It would be impacted by any stormwater control measures that were designed for the property to manage that stormwater. And obviously, once again, if it's septic development, it's going to be impacted also by the suitable soils and how those septic systems lay out.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Really, that minimum square footage sort of dictates what can happen,
Yeah.
regardless whether it's net or gross.
In that particular district. Now, it's different with the other districts, so-called paper districts, right? It's different with that. I mean, especially because a lot of those districts, well, not all, a lot of them, but there are districts in there that are really designed for development in areas where you have infrastructure to support it, right? That is why you see a higher rate of density for those.
Yeah, and I think to Commissioner Stovall's point before, We had the downzoning and we were talking about the cluster or conservation where you could take that, have much more open space and then smaller lots, but achieve the same, or close to the same density. I guess it would depend as well, but I guess we still, can we do that without the paper districts? Do we have anything where we could do that?
You can, we can create that mechanism, right? We can, instead of having a minimum lot size, we can kind of, and you can still require minimum lot size, but you can cluster to the extent the physical attributes of the property will allow it, right? So you can migrate back to, say, 1.5 units the way we used to do it. And that could be calculated on that gross density, just knowing that there's areas that's gonna have to be set aside and segregated from those lots, wetlands, riparian area, whatever it may be. And you may get, there may be some value there, right? Some value of 1.5 units per acre on 75 looks a lot different than 75 acres divided by 6,900 of an acre.
I would strongly caution against eliminating the minimum lot size we now have, because anything that we do now, based upon the climate of the General Assembly, is probably gonna be irreversible. If it reduces, or the size of the lot, and we say we're no longer gonna use 30,000 or 40,000 in environmentally sensitive areas, the General Assembly could lock us into that, and then the major objective of the land use plan is to get reasonable density out in these rural areas and push the higher density toward the municipalities. It's gonna hamstring our efforts to do that if we change the lot sizes.
Well, I think there's a happy medium that we're going to have to find then, because I tend to agree with you, Commissioner Stovall, that I feel like where we're sitting in our lot size is feasible. I think, some of my concerns are, there's, no matter what we do, you're not going to be allowed but to put so many more houses on a piece of dirt because of septic requirements. I mean, we're already starting to get at the bare minimum of what we can do to fit a house and a septic system and a repair area on there as it is. And then you add, wetland delineations and easements and stormwater changes and things like that. And I feel like we've almost already shrunk our lot size to as small as it can possibly be and still be realistic. So I would throw those concerns out along with this conversation. I agree. I don't think we should change the minimum lot size, but I also don't feel like if we go to net acreage, we're really going to be able to accomplish, unless we're talking about sewer districts, getting more houses on any more size land than what we're pretty much already doing, just because of with the soils and everything, trying to get a septic and a repair area on there, we're eating up the majority of our lots as it is.
Well, I think the density calculation definition is not a hill to die on here. If there's more legal complexities associated with net acreage versus gross,
Agreed.
stick with gross, because what I just heard, it does not affect, as long as we don't change the minimum lot size, it really doesn't affect how many houses can be put on a piece of land. It's just how you present it. By using gross, the argument that I heard from basic citizens is it's misleading, because the net acreage is more realistic. But again, if it opens you up to legal challenges, and it really truly doesn't change how many houses you can put on a parcel of land, then so be it. When you got the final layout and all the lots are approved and you've got a number of houses in there, if you want to do a net density calculation, you just divide total acreage by the resulting number of houses that you can realistically put out there. But gross is the basis on the front end, and I don't have a problem with that, as long as, like I say, we maintain the ability to keep our lot sizes reasonable for a rural area that has septic and possibly wells, because we have relaxed the well standards, because quite frankly, the system development fees on waters have got so high now that a lot of homeowners that need water connections saying it's not in my best interest to tap on. And you've got to be able to site a well on that lot as, in addition to have a septic field and a septic repair area.
And the separation standard for wetland septic has decreased.
Yeah.
In recent years, so it's no longer 100 feet, it's now 50, which makes it a little more feasible.
Well, I guess I want to go back to the paper districts, because I thought we had talked about the clustering and it being part of what we wanted to do, but to me, if and I know individual septic lots, but if we went to community, or if somebody wanted to go to community, you could still, if it was 50 lots, you could get on 100 acres, you could condense that down to say 25 acres and have 25 more of open space. So I don't know if that's an option that's in there in the paper district somewhere, but it seems like clustering, and it would get away a little bit from the lot size, but it seems like there's some other options that I know that I don't know if we want to eliminate those, and I'm not don't know what that means as far as practicality, but it seems like there ought to be some way, given somebody's particular situation on a piece of land, that you could cluster and get same number, smaller lots, but result in more open space.
Community septic, I think, is allowed by the General Assembly, if it's supportable from a technical standpoint. It's not desirable long-term, but it certainly is allowable. So I don't know that we can preclude being able to do that, since it is something that is recognized as a potentially viable alternative under certain conditions. But
And-
that would
and
be
if I
the
may-
only way you're really gonna choose to get, beg pardon?
And if I may, just to contribute a little bit to this discussion, you can certainly incentivize density. So you could have the minimum, but you could also incentive clustering if you wanted to. So those are some options that would be available to the board.
And just for the public, can you explain what you mean by incentivize? Because it sounds different than what I think you're intending it to mean.
Yes, it is not incentivized financially like we do with economic development,
Yeah,
so it's not that.
exactly, yes.
But it is to say, if you bring a higher quality development, if you do certain things, then you get certain benefits. We're not taking anything away, but if you do more, then you can get more density. So that's essentially what incentivizing density would mean.
Thank you.
So it could be the provision of open space, could be the provision of recreational opportunity within the development. Connection, building out a portion of a future greenway that's years out, according to Johnson County's Greenways plan. Those are the type of things. You get that density, you also get a slight density bonus, and that's and with regard to clustering, with some of the paper districts, we do have that clustering density there, so you do have that cluster option. It's just currently with AR, we don't have that.
Well, I think, did I hear that gross was good on that end of the table?
Yeah.
Gross is
Because
good.
I think that's where, like it says in the notes, of gross allows where you actually can choose where you want to put the houses, and that way I feel like you might actually can conserve more green space by choosing to put some stuff here and leaving the rest open space. I feel like you have more the flexibility of gross over net.
I would agree.
Yeah, so just a note there with that, and that's how it is today. It's no different than our current land development code. There's no mandate. There's an option to set aside open space. Open space, as it's defined today, does not allow qualifying open space, which is 15% minimum. Qualifying open space does not include wetlands, does not include riparian area. Now, that's not to say those features can't be a part of any given lot, so they're not set aside for any future conservation or anything of that nature, not mandated to be. But just wanted to put that out there. Just want to make sure everybody knows that they are still there. They're still part of a lot, but it is what it is. There are limitations with it.
So,
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, so 35 minutes on gross. I think
Yeah,
that's
the only
good.
thing, and I did have, still, I don't think we've touched, even the graphic here shows multifamily, and it seems like all of our discussion is, we're all talking about single family.
So there, we put the multifamily in there just as an idea. So we're, as a representation of how you're going to calculate, obviously multifamily is different. We know we're not going to develop, nobody's going to develop multifamily typically on the individual septic systems.
Okay.
Just because the numbers aren't going to work from an economics perspective. But if you look at a area where you have public sewer and now in an area that can close to other infrastructure, other facilities and amenities, multifamily becomes real. I think that's a little different conversation, but we wanted to make sure we just put that in there just to show you what density kind of looks
Okay.
like.
All right. So the goal today was to go through these sections and find consensus of the board to
Yes.
instruct staff to move forward. Am I understanding that that's the consensus of the board to move on?
Yes.
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 All right, let's call our next group.
So our next topic, real quick, are comments we've had. In the UDO, in the initial versions of the UDO, you saw there was once again, one of these paper districts, we're not mapping these, making this effective, was a rural crossroads district. So in the land use plan, there's several different place types which talk to rural crossroads, and there's a distinction between rural crossroads, neighborhood crossroads, or neighborhood place types, neighborhood centers, and even regional mixed use. This is really, I hate to say it's semantics, but it's really terminology is what we're talking about. So rural crossroads, the intent of the language in the current UDO, or in the previous iteration of the UDO, was rural crossroads district is intended to implement the regional mixed-use center character area. I had some concerns over this personally, even because here's why. A regional mixed-use center typically is a more intense development. It's a larger, kind of a larger scale, allows for greater square footage of building to be developed, to be constructed, whereas a rural crossroads place type in our land use plan and a neighborhood center is a much smaller scale, truly intended for rural development. And the regional mixed-use center, or the rural crossroads language as we currently have it, is a little misleading. It leads you to believe that, so if I'm at an intersection of, say, 39 and whatever, then I've got this rural crossroads where we have some development already that's providing services, but it's at a scale that's more of a rural scale, not that urbanized scale, right? So we want to have that distinction there.
For those watching, can you give us 2 examples in the county currently of one that is a rural crossroad and one that is a mixed-use center, just so people can have a visual of what
Could
we're
I
discussing?
suggest corner fire department, Thanksgiving and 42, where the new hardware store is and mini storage?
That's an extremely good example. So to me that's more of a rural crossroads, right? That is what that is. That true mixed-use center, that regional mixed-use center, as it's described, would be something more of, say, potentially the interchange of NC 210 and I-40, or even, you could even say, at some time, at some point, because it's the development trend's been moving that way, NC 50 and 210. But once again, it's subjective to an extent, right? Depends on who's looking at it. So rural crossroads, we don't think that rural crossroads is the most appropriate for the description and the intent of or as noted in the language for the particular district.
Thank you.
But the bottom line is, rural center and rural crossroads are basically the same thing, are they not?
A rural crossroads, not a regional center. So what we have, let's separate the district, the zoning district, from the place type. So in the zoning district currently today, it says rural crossroads. But your intent, in that intent statement or that description, it even mentions regional mixed-use center characteristics. So when you compare that to our land use plan, regional mixed-use center is a much more intensive use than what you would imagine a rural crossroads to be. Right? We don't imagine 125,000 square feet of commercial building in a rural crossroads, and apartments and higher density development. So that's why we're proposing the change. And I think it's a little bit confusing because you're talking a zoning district and the intent of the district or description of that district versus the place type. 2 different things, and this could be a little bit misleading with the rural crossroads terminology.
Does that make sense to everyone? Everyone understand?
I'm still a little confused.
Okay.
So we still have rural crossroads in the UDO along with regional center?
They're not separated. They're not 2 distinctly different districts. That's what we're saying.
But they're not one and the same.
They're not one and the same. That's why we want to change terminology. If you read as the language is, you have a rural crossroads, right? So
Yes.
that's the proposed language. We want to separate them. Best case scenario is let's separate them. Regional mixed use, create a district that's regional mixed use, and then we create a district or regional center, whatever you want to call it. Then a rural crossroads. But in the language, we want to distinctively describe what the purpose and intent is for each.
Okay,
of them.
all right.
Because the scale is very different.
Yes.
And when you look back to our land use plan, the scale is, I mean, it's even from a quantitative perspective, it even talks quantitatively about the intensity of each district. Regional mixed use center has numbers in there of 125,000 square feet of retail building or commercial non-residential building. Obviously, you don't want this in the middle, say the meta community at 96 and 50.
Right.
You don't want that.
Well, that was part of the concern about, we're trying to, quote, preserve the rural neighborhood character. Then it gave the impression that if this is replacing rural crossroads, then we're basically encouraging sprawl. But that's not the case here.
No, that's not the intent. We do not.
At what point do you go from a rural crossroads to a regional center? What is the threshold?
So, right now, as far as the language is concerned in the ordinance, we doesn't have necessarily a threshold, a quantitative threshold. But when you're talking about rural crossroads from the land use plan, this is your guiding document. Remember that in all land use decisions, this is what your reference for guidance. That threshold, that's 25,000 square feet as opposed to 125,000 square feet.
Okay,
That's a large difference.
all right.
So that's what you're focused on, is the scale and the intensity. So rural crossroads at 96 and 50 looks a lot different than a regional mixed use center at NC 210 and 40.
Agreed.
Yes.
Is everybody good with the proposed new language on that,
Yes.
Vice Chairman?
I think so. I think I understand it.
So in
You
other
would-
words,
you would
to
still have the
separate it
yellow-
out.
The yellow stores that go up on the corner, that would be the rural crossroads?
Yes.
Dollar General.
Yeah.
That might be the one I was thinking about.
The yellow
Yeah.
Yellow stores versus the Target, right, or the
Yeah, yeah.
Walmart, or, yes.
Okay, all right.
If you want to.
I understand a little bit better now.
Yeah.
As long as we have some way to clearly delineate that for the average citizen out there to understand it, I think that's the key point.
Yeah.
Because the goal in rural crossroads development is to provide those services for the most rural areas at the scale in which they're intended to be used.
Right.
And for the needs of the community, as opposed to regional speaks to, we're bringing people from a larger region, even outside of the county, into Johnson County to patron those services.
All right, you got what you need on that one?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's move on.
Our next item is, this is a section in the ordinance, B1-10.2A, and this is under use standards in our ordinance, and it's related to agricultural and crop production. And so previously, back in March, at the meeting that was conducted at the Ag Center, we had heard numerous concerns about the keeping of animals and how that was restricted and so on and so forth. The intent there with that was strictly in formed or organized neighborhoods. So subdivisions, true residential development, not the 1 or the 3/4 acre lot, random lot on a secondary road. We're talking about formal development. The board at that time instructed staff to remove that. The reason this is on here today, we're asking, was the intent there to remove all standards associated, because this is a section where the livestock and keeping of animals and whatnot was included. We want to know was it the intent to remove all of this language? Here what we're talking about are certain uses such as a greenhouse and their standards for limitations on the height and size or the size of the greenhouse, no produce stands of any sort, and no raising of potentially limiting raising of crops or whatnot. Not talking about bona fide farms. If you're a farming operation, you are a farming operation. That is what it is. You're not restricted. But what we're talking about are those that are not bona fide farms or not truly a farm operation that we want to restrict that. Just need some direction from the board.
And this is major subdivisions.
Not necessarily. Language isn't there to state it's major subdivisions. We can do that. However, there's,
That's what it's, I mean, it says this shall apply only
Yeah.
to major residential subdivisions.
and once again, yes, we can. Major subdivisions is subject to change potentially, right? So you could go from a major subdivision, today major subdivision is 4 lots or greater when you, from a parent parcel. It
Bryce,
could increase.
Can you remind us what the current ordinance states with regards to farm animals? I know that was one of the concerns.
There's currently, it's not addressed at all.
So I thought that there, and again, this is just how we were trained in real estate, for lack of a better word, that it was like a minimum 1 horse per acre. That was,
That is a guideline. Those guidelines are put out, but there's different guidelines depending on what type of agency or advocacy group you may reference. So the American Quarter Horse Association, for instance, says they recommend 1 acre per animal, right? And this is for grazing. But if you're supplementing feed, if you're supplementing their feed regimen with grains of some sorts or oats, then you may not need 1 acre
And
per
again-
animal. But I don't know that we want to get into those details. What
Yeah.
we're talking about is in development.
Right.
Formal development, what's the pleasure?
If I could help clarify what drove this, because I was in on stakeholder groups, been involved throughout the entirety of this process, but the major complaint we heard from the citizens is they don't want our UDO to basically become an HOA type style document. And they saw regulation of livestock and certain agricultural activities in a residential setting to be the purview of an HOA as opposed to actually having government to regulate that. I tend to support that contention, but we said we definitely needed something in there to allow, take in consideration that youth livestock programs or growth programs, farming growth programs that serve 4-H, FFA, there needs to be allowances to allow those to continue under certain conditions that were reasonable within a residential setting. But beyond that, anything regulated beyond that need to be largely dictated by a homeowner association. Now, there's a lot of debate about are homeowners associations effective. Regardless of that, we have homeowners associations, and whether or not they're effective really is up to the residents that live there. That whole issue about what does a homeowner association does? Well, it's designed to preserve the value of the property for all residents. Can they be overbearing? Certainly. Can they be underutilized? Most certainly. But then again, it gets back to, are you going to let the residents decide, or are we going to dictate it from the government standpoint?
No, and I agree, and like I said, I think there were a couple, outstanding circumstances that brought up some of these conversations, and again, it's not just, and I'm just trying to I'm just having this conversation for clarification
right.
purposes for everybody, so, in my line of work, not only are HOAs very ineffective a lot of times, but covenants expire. And so I have been in situations where, you've got an older subdivision where the covenants have expired, and you've got someone that has 4 horses on their less than acre property, and now they're trying to have a bona fide farm in a subdivision on a 1 acre lot, and all their neighbors are being affected like they moved into a farming community. That was literally one of my first county commissioner calls, was a horse that was emaciated from lack of care. And so, we've heard that. We've heard that people, on their lots have 50+ chickens and are creating, health concerns for their neighbors.
Oh, yeah.
And so I just, wanted to talk about, if we take this completely away, what are we potentially creating? And so I just want to make sure that, I thought, again, just kind of how it's brought up in my other day job was, 1 horse per acre. That was kind of what we said. I mean, there's actual, obviously, equestrian communities around here that are made for that. But when we get into those things, is there anything that the county should have involvement in to make sure that we're...
Well, are land use rules the appropriate place, or should we have some statutes that give us some enforcement criteria on animal conditions? You know, is this the right place for
Right.
it in county?
Oh, I agree, and that's why we're having this conversation. I just
I
want to
agree,
make sure.
because I raise horses. And I'm fully aware of what you need to support a horse, and you need at least an acre per horse. I'd say 2 acres per horse would be preferable if they're gonna be grazing year-round. But I think there ought to be some sort of other means available to us from a animal protection standpoint to ensure that they're being treated humanely and properly. And that's not necessarily where they're at. And I think where they're at may be something that'd be better served by the HOA.
But to that point, in most communities, especially in the county right now, their HOAs are becoming more and more prominent, but you look at everything that was developed the last 30 to 40 years, the HOA and the covenants are non-existent, unfortunately. And so that's just, again, I'm not for the overreach either and us telling anybody how many chickens they can have or whatever. I'm just trying to protect the property
let me ask this
rights of
question.
the neighbors.
Preston, this new UDO cannot be retroactively applied to existing development, can it?
No, but if you don't keep animals today, and let's just say there was an animal provision, because right now that's been removed, just want to make that clear, because that was board direction prior. But if there were a standard where you limited 10 chickens in a major residential development for any lot with no roosters, they don't have any today, then there's nothing to apply. But
Well-
if they wanted to establish a chicken coop or keeping of chickens, then if the standard was in place, they'd have to adhere to the standard.
And just for y'all to know, we are seeing more of that. Like, personally, there's a lot of local attorneys who are drafting covenants now to allow up to 4 fowl, no roosters. Chicken coops have to be approved by the ARC. So a lot of this is starting to be put in place from an HOA and a covenant
And most of these
standpoint.
municipalities have some sort of rules governing livestock as well.
Right.
You know, it gets back to, you know, do we want it as a county, is it appropriate to be in the land development ordinances, or is there a more appropriate place in our county ordinances to deal with something like that?
I think that's what we talked about 6 months ago, 7 months ago, is when this first came up, and there's probably a better place that we can address this rather than in our UDO.
Well, the reason it's in there at all, I think, is largely because the development side was pushing that from a property value standpoint. You know, they viewed it as a headache, something they didn't really have to deal with in trying to market their houses. But I don't think there was a lot of sentiment one way or the other in terms of initially when it went in there, but we found out that it was certainly a hot button issue with the,
There was a lot of sentiment.
yes.
Well, and I think too, we were trying to accomplish, you know, helping out the one gentleman who we saw a lot last year, who quality of life was being impacted by his neighbor who was not an HOA, did not have covenants, and had 50-some chickens in his yard. And so we tried to determine at some point in time, should we as a county step in? And I think the citizens let us know, we're not needed in that regard. So again, just discussion of kind of how we got here and what we've landed on, and if we're of the consensus that we're okay saying, listen, we need to use our other programs to enforce anything that is creating a negative impact, then I'm good with that. I just
Okay.
wanted to make sure we, again, I called Bryson when this first came up.
Yeah.
You know, I just hope that we see people being responsible.
Well, ideally, we want everyone to be responsible, but
Right.
that's, you know, you have laws and rules because not everybody acts in a responsible behavior. So
Right.
that's when government has to step in and protect the rights of the individuals that are having their rights trampled on by an irresponsible neighbor.
I got a question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Something seems to be incongruent, I'm not understanding right. The first paragraph, A, talks about the standards included below are not intended to restrict non-commercial production on a small scale. The growing and sale of agricultural crops on the premises shall not constitute agricultural crop production. But then down below that, it says there shall be no retail sales on the site in major subdivisions, and it limits greenhouses. Of course, that's residential stuff, that's not farming operations, is that right?
That's correct. It's not farming operations.
I think that's
But
the
that's
key.
the old, that's the,
That's the current version that's posted.
Okay.
That's version 2.
I think that's the key difference is it's residential, it's subdivision, residential subdivision versus someone's got a couple acres out in the country and they want to have a greenhouse, and they want to have some, a garden. I don't have any desire to regulate what their greenhouse looks like or how many chickens they have or whatever. I do think that, you know, residential subdivisions, that's a little bit different. I live in a neighborhood and I'm not sure I would be wild about my neighbor putting up a chicken coop, but that's why I live where I live, and that's why other fixes. So I think that's the big difference. So you either leave it out or you play on the verbiage that it's for major residential subdivisions.
So, and we're talking, again, major as currently defined is 3 and above. So it's not
4.
necessarily-
4.
4 and above, okay,
4
so
and
it's
above, yeah.
4 and above, so it's not necessarily a 50-home.
No. So it could be a 6 acre parcel, right? And they divide into 4 1.5 acres.
And so
4
what,
1.5 acre lots.
and I
Would
guess
consider
when I'm
that.
looking at the proposed one, it's, I guess, who defines primary purpose in that at some point? I guess that's where you're trying to figure out where do you cross the line between,
Well-
is living there the primary, are you trying to do something, and then the other, there was one other thing, restrict non-commercial production on a small scale. So to me, primary and small seem vague, and maybe intentionally vague for our attorneys.
Well, it's subjective, right? I mean, a small scale garden for me would be, we're talking 4 rows of 150 feet long versus someone who says, my neighbor's got a garden and it's almost 1.5 acres. So, obviously our scale of a garden is very different.
To me, and this is something, not to interrupt you, Bryson, I feel like we have been trying to kind of delineate is at what point in time, and again, I'm just using this one guy that kept coming in here, his neighbor has 50 chickens. At what point in time is that not considered a commercial operation? Because I cannot figure out why you would, for your own personal use, have 50 chickens producing. And so, we've got to say, okay, if we require the farmer 2 doors down to have a permit and everything else for his 100 chickens, like I said, I even went down the path of asking our insurance agents to represent farmers, like, what is that dividing line? And I guess there's not a clear answer. And the same thing with these produce stands. I see them all the time where they're popped up because somebody has an acre-sized garden. Again, I don't have issues with any of it. I'm just trying to clarify, make sure we're being as fair to everyone as we can. This person has an acre garden. They've got this cute little stand out in the front of their yard, but then, half a mile down the road, there's just Pace's Produce that has to have a commercial license. They have to have a permit. They have to have this. So do we have language that we feel like creates that dividing line so that we're protecting those that are doing this for profit, but not limiting those that just have, somebody, listen, I have friends that have daughters that are selling eggs on the side to make little summer money. I'm not trying to disregard any of that. I'm just trying to make sure, do we feel like we have definitive language of what is considered commercial and what is not? I think that is probably the bigger issue, more so than necessarily, obviously if it's in a subdivision, we've got other layers, such as covenants, such as HOAs, things that are enforceability. I'm just talking about throughout the county, do we feel like we've got a delineation between the two? Or if nobody cares, I can hush.
I think, Ms. Stevens, based on the way that it is right now, the delineation is the standard, or at least what is being proposed. The delineation is in the standard that there's no retail sales on the site in a major subdivision. That's the standard as it exists, as it's being proposed. And that's it. Mr. Newton, would you agree with that?
I would, yes.
Okay.
And obviously, not all major subdivisions are the same.
Right.
I'm fine with taking that out, but that's just my opinion.
I'd like to say that, when, I think there was a lot of misinformation that got out there when we first started talking about this, thinking that it was going to be throughout every rural person in the whole county, whether in a subdivision or not, that there was going to be some chicken counting police going out around and trying to see how many chickens were over there, and that was never the intent. But, I remember suggesting, and I think we were on the same page, that this whole thing had kind of hijacked the entire UDO. And at that time, I think that's why we wanted to just remove the restrictions so that we could get to what was the truly important part and what the UDO was intended to do. And so I'm still fine with leaving this out. And I've never been a person who likes to make a rule for the masses based on the problems of one or two. And I feel like for the gentleman that came in and had the problems, my heart goes out to him. But for every one of him, there's 100 more chicken owners and that are doing things responsibly and not causing a problem. And so therefore, I'm still in favor of keeping that part out of the current proposed draft.
I'll expand on that a little bit too. I'd love to just see us stay out of it. I mean, honestly, if somebody wants to raise their own food in their backyard, as long as it's not, if it's in a residential subdivision, they have HOAs, they have covenants that restrict that. If you're out here in the country, have at it. I don't see there's a big issue with it, so. Is that the consensus of the board to just leave this out? Is everybody good with that, or?
I'm good with it. Like I said, I just wanted everybody to hear kind of where we got to, why we're concerned about it. But at the end of the day, I tend to agree. We don't need additional government overreach. Just want our citizens to understand that we are concerned about that, but it's not something that we're gonna necessarily jump in and take.
Yeah, I don't really have a problem, because even if we're, if it's beyond them providing for themselves, that's one thing. But even if it's an opportunity to, make a little extra income, maybe to make ends meet, that if that's what they're gonna do, I'm for staying out of it. And, if it rises to a level where neighbors against neighbor, we'll hear about it, and maybe there's some other way to address
Are we
it.
comfortable leaving the youth program exception in there?
I don't think we would need it.
It wouldn't even be needed, I
Yeah.
don't think.
We wouldn't.
Well, an HO could come in and say you can't keep an animal.
Oh,
And
could we
I
override
don't
that?
think we could.
I don't think we can
I don't think
we can
we make an
override that.
HOA, make a rule for an HOA. That's the problem.
well, if we make a rule that it's allowable under the county, can they supersede it?
They can,
Pardon?
they can.
They can?
Within that development, it's applicable only to that development. It's a,
Because pretty much every HOA rule is in addition to what the county allows. Every rule in an HOA is above and beyond what the county.
because I can tell you, our normal practice is when someone says, can we do this? And you're in a major development, or you're subject to some type of restrictive covenant in that development, we always say per county requirements, per county regulation, yes, absolutely you can, but please check with reference your restrictive covenants as it may be precluded. So
So I guess the answer is you can leave it in there. It doesn't really, if we're eliminating this, it's not needed. I mean, you can leave it in there for good measures, I guess, but then in the subdivisions, when you buy that house and you sign that restrictive covenants, I mean, you're agreeing to what they're saying. So I don't know, we can't override that.
So if I might, for purposes of clarification, because I want to make sure that staff understands the direction, we would be removing anything related to greenhouses and the size and all of those sorts of things. We would keep out, as has most recently been proposed, the limitation on keeping of animals completely. And then the produce stand and that sort of thing would be permitted as a matter of right, and it would be allowed in residential development, and there would be no restrictions related to operation and scale. Or do you want to leave in the language with regards to retail sales in major subdivisions?
I thought we were gutting it.
Yeah, and that's what I
thought we were
thought I
eliminating
heard. I just wanted to be sure we're taking it all out.
Yeah, take it all.
Okay.
The consensus of the board to eliminate the whole section.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, there you go. Move on to the next one.
All right, so our next topic. I don't know what happened. Where'd that- there we go. So, this is more of a newer, I guess, a newer consideration, but with regard to district development standards in the AR district, specifically the AR district. Today, Johnston County allows for, and we've already spoken about this, allows for a 30,000 square foot lot minimum, or mandates a 30,000 square foot minimum when not in a ESA or water supply watershed overlay, whereas that would, if they are, it would mandate a 40,000 square foot minimum. There was discussion, and it was brought up during stakeholder meetings and by various individuals of giving an option where, I guess, making this uniform to 30,000 square feet. It really has no impact, as our stormwater ordinance has changed considerably, and a large part of that was due to state mandates. So the 40,000 square foot in the ESA and water supply watershed doesn't really have any impact now with the changes in our stormwater ordinance. It was mentioned to go to a uniform 30,000 square feet in the proposed or in a subsequent version. We asked the board to give us their,
I'm not in favor of changing the 40,000 square foot regardless of the stormwater rules. We've heard stormwater rules themselves may be legally challenged. What if they get revised and they're lessened? Then we've lost that option available to us if we eliminate the 40,000 square foot watershed protection required area. There's still environmentally sensitive areas. You look at what our water source is, the Neuse River. This is probably the sickest river in the state right now. You know, it's got nitrogen limitations that are largely there because two reasons. We've got runoff from built-upon area, and we've got elimination of filtering vegetation that is allowing nitrogen-producing constituents to get into the river. The quality of the water in the Neuse is our only drinking water supply right now. If you look at there's 3 testing stations on the Neuse River in Johnston County. They're all up and down the river from the headwaters to the coast, and any of those 3 stations, each month, they post results each month on a website. Sometimes one of them fails for bacteria contamination, sometimes 2, and oftentimes I've seen all 3 have failed. And they tell you that river's not safe to swim in. Our own environmental utility staff says the water we take out of the Neuse for our drinking water and treat and put back in our sewer plant is dirtier than what we put back in it. Our main water intake in Wilson Mills is just downstream from the city of Raleigh's major wastewater treatment plant. Yeah, we have seen multiple spills in this county and in surrounding counties of wastewater systems in recent years. We actually had our wastewater plant down on 301 was completely submerged after a hurricane. I think it was Matthew. You know, that's the type of things we're dealing with here. Our water quality is not improving, and we need, in my view, to maintain that environmentally sensitive criteria in our planning documents, in our development standards. These areas are clearly delineated on our GIS system. It's not hard to identify where they're at. So it's clearly shown. It's not making it more simple to go to one size, 30,000 square feet. But if we're truly going to try to preserve rural character as well as maximize our natural resources, I think we need to keep this in place. I think there's too many variables out there that could come back to bite us, not the least of which is a legal challenge to the stormwater rules, further changes from the General Assembly that like the down zoning provision, that, or if it didn't even get repealed, we've got those issues to deal with. So I'm opposed to eliminating it.
All right, anyone else?
I just want to clarify some things. I know the 2 things you'd mentioned about development and runoff. I think there's a third thing that is generally accepted, and that is the nutrient runoff from farms. So it's not just the 2 that you mentioned. I don't know what percentage of
I agree, nitrogen is predominantly coming to farm, but it's because we don't have the filtration there on the path to the river anymore.
I will disagree on that, because I think there are some farms along rivers, so I think that you can't rule it. You can't say it's totally ruled out.
We're both civil engineers.
Yeah, I think.
And my background was water resources. I know yours as well, but.
Yeah, I was just going to say there are other than the 2 you mentioned. There's another factor in there. So, and I would dare say any water treatment plant puts cleaner water back in because there are standards for that they put back in the river. So there's not any rivers, I think, that run cleaner than the discharge from water treatment plants wherever they are. So just to clarify those.
A lot of them run dirtier too.
I don't disagree with that, but I'm just saying is there are standards, public standards, and for water discharge from our wastewater treatment plants. I do think we have made through our stormwater ordinances, have changed the landscape on what is developable land. And I am not opposed to these changes, because again, if we get into the what ifs, then we might as well not do any of this. So I would be agreeable to the changes that are proposed in here, and we, just like the others, we're going to deal with lawsuits, and we'll see what happens when they come. But that's my opinion on it.
And I would like to add that, before last year, if any resident was out in the county and they wanted to build a house, they were required to hook onto the county water if they were within 300 feet of the line. But we've removed that restriction, and now they can dig a well. And so with the setbacks that have been changed by the state, I'm not completely, I'm somewhat malleable on the point of the environmentally sensitive areas, but I do think that according to Todd Ramsey and our environmental, that if it's not in an environmentally sensitive area, that 30,000 square feet does work for both well and septic now, and it does make that a little bit more streamlined. And other than somewhat restricting growth, I can't really see a reason why we wouldn't at least change it to 30,000 for well and septic in a non-environmentally sensitive area.
Isn't that what we currently have,
Yeah,
Preston?
we currently have
We
30,000
currently
square
have
feet
that.
in those areas.
Yeah.
It's in an environmentally sensitive or water supply watershed, it's where that triggers the 40,000 square feet.
Why would we not want the most protection for our watershed?
Right. No, it's, that was not what I was saying.
We already allow well
we-
and septic on
I
30,000
was
if it's
thinking,
not environmentally
okay,
sensitive.
my mistake, and I thought it was still 40,000. I thought it was 40,000.
I think in conversations with the director, with Mr. Ramsey, there were conversations, he and I have had multiple conversations on multiple occasions about, since the standard between the well and to septic separation standard was reduced to 50 feet, he's advocated for uniforming that standard of that minimum lot size standard to 30,000 square feet. So I know you've had conversation with him about that as well, but that would eliminate the 40,000, but.
That's what I was referring to.
Yeah, yeah.
That's something I was trying to
Yeah,
clarify.
We're good.
Okay.
Yeah, we already got that.
Yeah.
That's
We
something
have
I was trying to
30,000.
clarify.
Yeah, we have
is-
30,000 today, so that's.
Now, I will add the caveat that well water is not the panacea to the problems in the news.
No.
Because well water in this county is typically got undesirable level of radioactive nuclides in it and other contaminants. So you have to look at potentially filtering that in order to use well water.
I fought hard several years ago to get that minimum lot size in place. And at that time, I proposed 40,000 on everything, but
Yes.
it has worked this way, and I would agree with Bill.
And I would just say that also with our new stormwater regulations, they were designed and implemented to improve the water quality as well.
They're designed that way, provided they don't lose in a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I'll go back, if that's,
I think the risk is too high because General Assembly, anything you change now with the current rules, you can never go back to it with the prohibition on downzoning. So we eliminate that 40,000 square feet. We could, even if we see a critical need and that our stormwater rules either are not effective or they get modified, we can't go back to it. Why do we want to give that up right now? If the regulatory climate in the General Assembly relaxes or changes, we can always go back and make an amendment at some later date. But giving it up now is probably the worst thing we can do in terms of the unfavorable climate we got now in the General Assembly.
and really, can't really disagree with that, but if we operate out of the fear of being sued, then where are we talking about?
Well,
Any
it's
of
not the
this.
fear of being sued, but it's a reality, because I feel like that, you look at the water quality issues and this, you look at who's building this county now. We got major national strip builders coming in here as the predominant builder. They come in and the first thing they do is they scrape up all the topsoil and all the vegetation off the entire site, flatten it out so they can maximize the number of building sites on it, come back in and what they replace it with, even with the stormwater measurements, does not match the vegetation they remove. These are your natural filters. The other thing we've got to consider is in 2023, in the Supreme Court decision of Sackett, the 90% of protection of wetlands at the federal level were ruled no longer protected because of a definition problem in the statute by the feds. they said you didn't define who are the waters of the United States clearly enough, so we're gonna say that any wetland protection now is the purview of the states only, and not the feds. So you got 90% of your wetlands that no longer have federal protection because of that rule. And until the federal government or the EPA comes up with a new definition of the waters of the United States, they said unless the wetland is physically touching, the water in the wetland is physically touching, quote, the waters of the United States, it's not a wetland. It's not a true wetland. It's an isolated wetland if it's not touching. From a scientific standpoint, that's not a good place to be. But they're saying that we're not saying wetlands are not important. We're just saying that the definition in the statute is not defined well enough in order to afford that level of protection. So we're seeing a rollback of environmental protections at local, state, and federal levels that is, in my opinion, going the wrong direction.
So are you saying you need Bryson for this? Do you want us to say if we agree with it or disagree with it for what's proposed?
So essentially, do you want to remain status quo?
What about the municipal transition districts?
They remain just as they are today. There's no change. We've had no change there.
So 40,000 in environmentally
Middle.
sensitive, 30,000 if not.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's what's proposed.
Yeah,
Right.
that is, yeah, that's
Yeah.
understandable.
Versus essentially a
Is that
blanket
gonna accomplish
30,000.
what we wanted to
Do
accomplish, though?
you want to
Which is
stand,
that fence.
remain status quo, or do we want to entertain
That next
a uniform 30,000?
Only asking again for public transparency, and because I've ran into this, how again are the environmentally sensitive lines
Well, these municipal
determined?
transition districts are probably gonna have public.
So that's a difficult question to answer because I was not here when they were established, but
And that's the reason I'm
specifically-
asking,
yeah.
because I have been told in the past that they're a little bit egregious.
They are broader than the subbasins they're intended to capture or impact, right? So why they're broader, I do not know. But generally speaking, I know what our current procedures are, even our public utilities office. They're going to look at the subbasins impacted based on the HUC maps, which are established at the state by water quality. So we reference those, and we've seen multiple occasions where someone's wanting relief from that, and the relief is just simply they show that these boundaries are not consistent with those maps. As long as they're consistent, if they're consistent with those maps, then the ESA is applicable, or even the water supply watershed is applicable. If it's not consistent and those boundaries were expanded, because it was extremely random, not really sure why. Could have been access to data, possibly, I don't know, but the map data exists now. That's an easy fix as we go through this process.
Well, and as a part of that, so to add on to that, if someone were to go to this process, and let's just say we had changed it to the 30,000 square foot, just baseline across the board, assumably, they would understand what additional measures would need to be taken once they came to the planning department, recognize that their property that they were intending to develop was in one of these watershed or environmentally sensitive areas, and as a part of their proposal to the planning board for the development, they would have to submit what measures they were going to take to correct or protect those areas, correct?
That's correct. That's built into our stormwater ordinance, right? And that stormwater ordinance, we know, changed last year and went into effect at the beginning of this year. And Commissioner Lauder mentioned earlier that it's having a positive impact. We've seen that already.
Well, and that's
Not only from an operational perspective on our side, but also from a quality of product and performance, in actual reality.
And that's what I'm trying to figure out is the stormwater and wetland protection measurements that we've done kind of helped accomplish what putting in these restrictions on environmentally sensitive areas we're doing with egregious maps that nobody understands exactly how they got there to begin with. Is that fair?
It's fair assessment. Fair assessment.
All right, any other conversation about this? We need to come up with a consensus. It's either.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, so if what I'm looking at is proposed UDO, the middle column there. We're talking
Yeah.
about two of them is resort residential in the current UDO, or is that?
Yeah, that is, it's not changing. What we're talking about specifically here is, we pulled all of that information. We're talking about specifically the agriculture residential district only. 'Cause that's the district that is being impacted or that's being questioned by, do we go uniform 30,000, or do we maintain 30,000 and the 40,000? As status quo.
Okay, so if it's AR and it's in an environmentally sensitive area.
It would-
Or a watershed, or water supply watershed is 40.
It is 40,000 today, yes, sir.
And the proposal was 40,000.
If we want to maintain that, the question came to us as staff was, do we want to uniform the minimum lot size for the AR district to just 30,000? That was the question. We're bringing that to the board. We don't want to make that decision because there's ESA still effective, water supply watershed still effective because there's other provisions in there that are needed and necessary.
I guess my
to ensure-
confusion, it doesn't seem like it reads that way. It reads like 4 and 5 still say 40,000, and that's the proposed.
Yeah.
So it would,
No, if you look, so proposed would be table 1 point, eliminates that thing. If we propose, that's what you're considering. Do you want to eliminate the 40,000 square foot standard, or do you want to maintain it? It's,
The 40,000 only applies to
So we would
environmentally
take-
sensitive
Yes,
areas.
ESA
that
and water-
are
and water supply
based on an
watershed.
egregious map.
and 30,000 in non-environmentally sensitive with well and septic is allowed in this. Is that correct?
yes, yes.
All right, I was just going to, in the interest of moving things
Yeah.
along, I would like to hear more from our environmental health and our stormwater folks to see what that, I would say, justification is. But as I'm sitting here right now and knowing we've got others to discuss, I'm okay.
40 and 30 is how it is now. So I think, I don't think it's broken. I just wanted to talk about how we got here, why we're considering this, and does it make it easier on staff and all the departments if they're working off of one number
That's what
instead of everyone trying to figure out, are we
Keeping it uniform.
Yes, are we working off of two different numbers based on, to Braston's point, maps that really don't come into play? And so every project that comes to them, if I'm not mistaken, that it's in an environmentally sensitive, you have to really kind of negotiate, for lack of a better word, do we have to do 40,000 or not based on maps that.
Yeah, it's, operationally, from our perspective, I don't think it's a big concern.
Okay.
Having the two different. Is it always easier? Is less usually easier? Absolutely, but
Explain
it's
again,
not
what
been-
is
it's
the
not
basis?
been major.
You saying the maps are not legitimate, or you don't understand the basis how they came up with what is environmentally sensitive or a watershed management area?
It's the maps themselves, so the boundary. So what we're talking about is, we understand why they're in place, absolutely. We have some, I guess, challenged water features that need these added protections. The issue is the boundaries that are shown on our zoning atlas, which is MapClick, our GI, our public facing GIS. Those boundaries are expanded from the basins and subbasins that really should be impacted as described in the language for ESA, water supply watershed. More specifically ESA, because those boundaries should be based off of the basins and subbasin maps as established in the HUD maps.
Okay.
From the state.
In the interest of time, let's move on. Everybody's good with leaving it at the 30 and 40,000 as it currently says. Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Let's move on to the next one.
I want to move it to 40.
All right, this is going to be probably our biggest topic of the day, of the morning. So as you're all aware, as part of the land use plan development process, we had quite a bit of feedback from the community and a need for an agriculture or a buffer between agriculture and non-agricultural development, right? Many things were discussed in terms of what it physically looks like, in terms of width, plantings, and otherwise what may be permitted or not permitted in these areas. And we still do not have a consensus from the community, and we're looking for some guidance here from this board. So, and I'll run through a few slides here. And we had these were posters at the community meeting back in March that were presented during the open or the drop-in session after the formal meeting. So these have not changed. These are just excerpts from that. So the considerations at the time that garnered the most votes were deals. So we had a 35-foot buffer, and various, various iterations of this buffer were in place at that meeting, were offered. There was a 50-foot buffer, once again, with different types of planning, planning requirements as well. There was also a 150-foot proposed. There has been discussion of a 75-foot wide buffer proposed as well. That would include landscaping or plantings also to a restricted amount, but they would be in place. So we're looking for some guidance from the board.
Just for the record, the 75-foot buffer got the most number of votes, affirming votes at that public meeting.
They did.
And for background, the land use plan called for a 150-foot buffer. Now, this has been one of the most contentious items been discussed, and it was thoroughly debated in the stakeholders group that reconvened to go through this. The input we had from the development community, they said they wanted no more than 35 feet for obvious reasons. The industrial farm representatives there, soil and water board representatives, and farm office representatives reached a consensus on a 75-foot buffer minimum with 10-foot open at the property line to prevent limb overhang onto crops and root draw of nutrients for the adjacent crops. Then 35 feet of heavily wooded buffer. There was a type of buffer that was specified, but basically they're looking for something that's going to give dust protection, sound protection, odor protection, and mitigate any nuisance claims about overspray. Farmers were very adamant that they act responsibly. They follow the manufacturer's recommendations on the use of their chemicals, but that does not prevent neighbors come in there and allege that their chemicals are somehow negatively affecting them. But if you got an absorption barrier out there, then it's going to greatly mitigate the potential for those type of claims. After 35 feet, they wanted another 30 feet to get the total to open area in order to get to a 75-foot separation. What they were hoping to accomplish by this is what they're experiencing every day. When they've got neighborhoods right on top of them, they've got trash that blows over into their fields. They've got people wandering into their fields as well as coming out there and basically treating their livestock like their pets, or it's a petting zoo. And I've mentioned this before, they've got the issue that some think it's an ATV course or it's a driving range. These are things that affect the bottom line of the farmers. You know, we recently had a lady that emailed the county and said that she had some teenagers on ATVs that rode through her hayfield and basically destroyed about 25% of her hay yield for this year. You know, you hope that you got responsible neighbors, but when you've got what effectively is a residential neighborhood and the farm next door, for lack of a better term, becomes an attractive nuisance to the residents and particularly teenagers and kids over there, and we need something that's going to provide a physical barrier out there that's reasonable and unobtrusive to discourage the type of activities that's affecting these farmers' bottom line. It's a reasonable protection. And I say the farm community says that, you know, we can compromise off the 150 feet, but 75 feet is where we would draw the line. The development side says, well, if we could find other uses we could put into that remaining 30 feet and have it be accepted, that may be something that we can live with. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but they had suggestions about putting stormwater control measures in there. I don't have a problem with that because that's going to be part of the reserved area anyway. If you can put stormwater control measures in that remaining open area, fine. There's also suggestions about what about putting walking paths or trails in there for community use. If as long as it's reserved in the deed for that purpose, no. I don't think there's going to be a problem from the farm side to see some utilization like that, but I think that needs to be explored from a legal standpoint. Again, it comes back, how do you do that and ensure that you've got the legal bases protected for that type of area. You certainly don't want your landowner coming in, or your homeowner coming in there and using it as a septic repair field. That's not acceptable. You don't want them coming back there and putting a storage building out there on that space, because it's not available to them to build on. I have to ask the question, when you look at our current land development ordinance, if a farm operator wanted to build a new farm structure, it says in there he's got to be at least 50 feet off his own property line and 100 foot away from the closest residence. Now, why is that farmer subjected to those standards, but this residence right now, under the current land development orders, can put his house 10 feet off the property line? Yeah, it doesn't make sense. You look at, a lot of other counties have farm setbacks, and they have said they have worked well, they have not diminished the value of the land and not have impacted the rate of development. Brunswick County has a 50-foot setback. They're the fastest growing county in the state right now. Johnson County is closely behind them. There's a lot of counties around us that have similar type criteria for farm protection. But farming seems to be the one that gets picked on the most. You got to have these if you want to build a new poultry house or a swine operation in this state, under North Carolina statute now, you got to have a 1,500-foot separation on your farm side in order to do that. You know, there's obvious odors concerns, there's things like that, but you don't have the same consideration on the other side for the development. You know, it's my understanding that zoning is designed to protect you from your neighbors. You know, and farmers deserve reasonable protection that their livelihood is not going to be adversely impacted or diminished because they've got a residential neighbor over there that is creating making these constant complaints and potentially jeopardizing their income. I think farmers are looking for fair consideration on both sides of the property line. There's going to have to be, nobody's going to give exactly what they want, but it has to be compromise here. And the farmer should not be the one that gives up all of the compromise. Now, I've heard from a lot of different people out there, some farmers who disagree with this, but they're in the minority. I've heard from some developers who disagree that it's needed. They want the lesser buffer. I had one contact me, a major developer, and he said I was welcome to use his name. Gentleman by the name of Evans, I think he just recently bought 100 acres in the Cleveland community. That he said he develops up to 200 houses a year in this county. He said, I live in Johnson County. He said, quite frankly, he said, I'm appalled at the quality of development that's going on in this county now. The people that are building here now are not local builders, not local developers. These are national strip builders that are coming in here, and they're building code acceptable houses in most cases, but they're not high quality. They're designed to sell fast, and they're taking advantage of the land prices in here to drive the cost up. And he says he is appalled at the quality of the development that's going on, and he wants to see better controls put in place. And he says, quite frankly, he says other jurisdictions that have put these type of separations in place, recognizing the farm community, says the industry has adjusted without problem. And he says my industry will do the same thing. Now, when you look at land value in this county, I don't think anything's going to affect the value of land in this county. You know, you've got some smaller farmers who it's not their primary income and looking at eventually I want to sell out because I can use that money for my retirement. Well, that's true. But before the land prices went through the roof, which has only been the last few years, I wonder what their plan was then. You know, that's my new 401k. Well, I hope they had that before that. But, you know, we've got to look at the fact that farming, agriculture is our #1 industry in this county. It's our major economic driver, and it will be for the foreseeable future. But if we do things now in terms of land use that make it more difficult for that industry to persevere, then we're going against the goals of the land use plan, which is to preserve the rural character and the agricultural way of life. Now, if people want to do that on their own and when they sell out, that's fine, that's their right. But we don't need to make it more difficult for them now in order to achieve that.
All right.
It's a complicated issue because I've heard from a lot of farmers who say the 75-foot buffer is adequate and it protects us. And I've heard other farmers say that if you do that, you're going to diminish my land value for the future. There's nobody been in this county longer in here than I mean, I arrived in the 40s. And I've seen it change a lot. But I must agree with Bill. I think 75 foot is a reasonable, when you look at this from 35 to 150, I think 75 was the most noted number from their feedback we got. And while I'm sensitive to what some of those farmers have said about the future value of their land, we've had a lot more feedback of an acceptable buffer is needed right now.
So can I ask you this, or I'm not necessarily proposing, but just curious for conversation. If, for instance, the neighboring farmer, landowner, I think it's important. I was told by a farmer, it's very important you delineate the difference between farmers and landowners at one of our meetings. And I said, that's a great point that I've not necessarily considered. But would it be worthwhile, whatever buffer we land on, if the person purchasing the land next to the adjoining landowner got a waiver and they were willing to waive the buffer? Do you feel like that would be reasonable if it was like a condition like we see before the planning board? I feel like that's a way we can protect both, because to both of your point, we have heard both sides, and I think of the amount of farmers who sell their own tract of land beside them, like, hey, this is more valuable to me to sell right now, so I can go buy this farm or that farm or do X, Y, Z. Are they going to be subjected to the same rules on their own land, if they decide to sell it to a developer? So just food for thought. I think it'd be interesting. I think that might be a way we could find a middle ground, is if we could institute some type of waiver system.
Another thing I had heard from some of my farmer friends, but that was one of the suggestions, was also that they don't necessarily like a one-size-fits-all plan, because the buffer between a livestock operation and a soybean field may need to be different. If the property is currently wooded or is forestry, they kind of said it was silly to put up, Leyland cypresses so you don't see the pine trees. And so, there are a lot of things that could come into play. And so I do whatever buffer that we land on, I do think that there shouldn't be a one size fits all, and that some of these things could be looked at the time.
I agree, because I think that's where it's very unique, and agriculture is very unique. It's different forms. You have crop rotation, so what might be in one field one year may not be the next for the next year. But more than likely, those hog houses and poultry houses aren't going anywhere. So I think that's where it makes a difference of having a different buffer between a field versus a livestock operation, because like I said, those hog houses, you can't build any more hog houses. There's a moratorium, so there are no more hog houses being built in North Carolina. But you can definitely put in a turkey house or a chicken house or anything like that. So, I mean, if someone all of a sudden, like I said, I think poultry and animal livestock is different than cropland. So I feel like we definitely need to have some sort of buffer between the two types of farms. And I would like to, like you said, I don't want us to clear cut trees just to make room for a type of buffer. So I feel like it needs to have something in there that if there's already whatever the natural vegetation is to leave it alone. So then that way that's already those natural sediments, as you were talking about earlier too, Bill, that's being able to be there for that wastewater and anything else that's going on. So, but I like the idea of having that to be used towards their open, like kind of like you were saying too, April, being able to use for their open space credit, or to be able to have for their riparian buffers, stormwater, anything like that. I want to make sure that that buffer is used to the extreme that it can be used for the developer, that they're able to maximize what they can off of that lot by putting that in place, while also protecting the farmer and the landowner that is being for that farmland. So like I said, it's going to be a lot to try to please both sides, but that's one thing that's been really neat, and I think it's very positive through this process, is both aisles have been able to come together to have conversations in these stakeholder meetings. And it's been really neat to be able to have conversations with everybody and all the stakeholders throughout the county to see the betterment of Johnston County. So that's one thing that's been really great, and I really appreciate all the citizens that are giving us these feedbacks that throughout this whole process has been very appreciated.
And one other thing I wanted to ask, I guess, our legal team about this is some sort of farm use acknowledgement that could be part of any plat that is going to be adjacent to a farm, because I think we're all in agreement that we want to protect farming as much as possible, and that we probably just have different approaches to how that needs to happen. But I don't know that this, well, like, this is a legal question, but if there was an acknowledgement in there when the property was purchased that states that, you know, you are locating next to
So
a
that's
bona fide
already
farm.
done.
Okay,
So that's already with the voluntary ag district.
Okay.
And those are already marked yellow on GIS. And so that's on the recorded plat. However, the caveat with that is not all farms are enrolled in the voluntary ag district
right.
plan.
That's that.
And so it is a free resource. Soil and Water does a great job with that. So if there is a landowner that wants to be highlighted on the map and it includes with their North Carolina Right to Farm Act, I'd highly encourage farmers to participate in that. But that is one thing that's already done, thanks to the General Assembly, to be able to market to protect the farmer and the landowner by being marked already yellow on GIS, and the neighboring farms will already be acknowledged on the plat whenever they go to purchase that property.
So,
but
but for
it's only
clarification, it's the
voluntary.
preliminary
It's
plat,
the preliminary.
not the recorded plat, it's the
Right.
preliminary.
That is something we can address if we want to go to the final plat.
Okay.
Post it on the final plat. We'll
I
just have to
think.
do it.
But I think it
For
needs to
example,
go on the
Henderson
final plat.
County uses the voluntary ag district as an incentivize a larger buffer.
Right.
If you join that, then, you know, we support having, I think it's a 100-foot buffer. You know, I'm open to anything to incentivize options here. But I think those, from a farm standpoint, those who feel like a 75-foot is absolute must for their condition, I said that should be a governing factor. Then have some flexibility in here within reason to allow alternative use in that
Right.
space that is mutually agreeable between the respective landowners.
Agreed.
Uh,
But I would like to see that on the final plat. Like I said, it's on the preliminary plat of the voluntary ag district when it comes to the planning board and everything like that, but I would like to see it on the final plat whenever, the new property owners that purchase the land next to it, they do have it, like you said, on the dotted line in their contract that they are next to a farm.
I think April and Mike both made some good points.
Yeah. But try to put 75 feet into context, it's probably 75 feet from where I'm sitting to the center of the road out there. You know, we're not talking about on physical ground. If you were to pull a tape out there and look at it,
25 yards.
yes, 25 yards, exactly.
But the caveat to that is you're typically not going to have houses sitting on that line because then you got septic fields to take into consideration. So, you
Well, I know
know,
the setback in the current UDO is 10 feet.
right.
And what is it in the draft we got now? Required minimum setback?
Yeah, I think we increased to 15 off of the rear line.
15.
So I'm just trying to create a visual for your 50.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But if you legally don't have to put it more than 15 feet, then put the septic up in the front of the house or on the side. But if you only got 15 foot off the line, then that's not gonna achieve the objective here.
This has probably been one of the most difficult parts of this UDO discussion, because you've got the farming community, and then you've got the farming community that doesn't agree. I know the email from Mr. Norris that y'all have at your seat, that was actually, which was, I thought was very interesting. It was actually 6 large farmers and 1 developer. They all came together and had conversation, which I thought was good. That's a good thing. But, you know, they were very concerned about the larger buffers using up so much land. You know, it's just land that's being taken away. They were more concerned about, you know, I think they even suggested 25 feet, but you can go back and read it for yourself. But it was an interesting concern from farm operations as well, because, I mean, once that 150 feet's gone, and you can eat up a lot of land all throughout the county doing it that way. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying this is a complicated part of this
And that's
UDO
where my
discussion.
concern
Yeah.
is if it's too large of a buffer of people, of wanting them to buy more land to make up for that loss, like for houses. So,
Well, because at
That's
the end of the
where
day,
my
we're just trying to be good stewards of it, one way or the other, whatever that looks like. So,
Well, we have two distinct areas in this county right now. Farming on the west side of 95 is in decline. On the east side of 95 is still thriving. This is where your big farms are at. They're the ones that are more adamant about protection. On the west side, those individuals looking at a road says, well, I'm farming right now, but I'm gonna sell out. I want to be able to maximize my profit when I do that. Well, that's everyone's goal, but it's not a guarantee to you. It needs to be, again, be something that is reasonable to all parties.
I had another legal question. In this, could this go into that whole downzoning argument that if we were to make too much of the land unusable, that it would somehow devalue the property?
So I think that, unlike the density issue that we talked about before, this is a little bit different. You know, development density, when it talks about not decreasing the development density of land to be less dense, that those terms are not defined on what that means. Is it less square footage or is it less number of units or lots, right? But I think there is a sliding scale here. The larger that buffer becomes, invariably you will reduce density. So I think that some sort of thing you might want to consider is, you know, how do we incentivize a larger buffer, right? Is there things that we can do to say, okay, if you're going to do a 75-foot buffer, maybe your lot sizes are smaller, or maybe there's other things that come along with that. But again, I think as you, whether it's 10, as you go from 10 to 20 to 50 to 75, every parcel is going to lay out differently, and could you still get the same density out of it that you would otherwise do? Maybe, maybe not. So it's a little bit case specific as to whether or not it would apply in a way that would reduce density. But I know, you know, some jurisdictions, you know, if you're going to have a 10-foot buffer, you got to have a 6-foot wall and massive plantings. If you're going to have a 30-foot buffer, you might be able to have a different type of planted buffer, the greater the separation. So those are tools that you have potentially to try and mitigate the risk associated with potentially reducing density with this buffer.
Thank you.
So where are some examples of those that we could look at
Like transitional yard or
in counties that do that?
well, I know the city of Raleigh has them. I mean, they have a transitional yard requirement where if you want to do a 10-foot buffer, it's a 6-foot wall and significant plantings. If you go to 25, it's a much more reduced planting. But and those are examples. I can look for others though in other counties where they have transitional buffers that the plantings and the requirements become less as the buffer becomes larger. So the idea being that if I mean, there's nothing in the downzoning legislation that says development can't be more expensive. So, you know, the idea that, you know, having a smaller buffer that is very intense may incentivize the developer to have a larger buffer where they wouldn't have to do as much within that 10 feet or 20 feet or whatever the number is. So, but I can look for specific examples. That's just one that came to mind, but there's plenty out there.
Thank you. All right, any other discussion?
Yeah, I was just going to say I know Commissioner Stovall mentioned the buffers that required for hog farmers, but that's a state buffer. It's not one that the counties decided, and so that's a little bit different. We're handling the ones that they tell us we can handle. The 75-foot buffer, to me, depending on the shape of the property, you could lose any ability to develop that, what's a meaningful develop that. So you've got folks who are out there who, with 75 foot, may not be able to develop their property, which goes to, you know, 401k retirement or whatever you want to do. We have a recent example in the Cleveland area where we've got a 75-year-old farmer who's trying to sell his land and has had a struggle for over 3 years trying to sell his land, and he will tell you, and I think he spoke with this board, that is his retirement. The very thing we're talking about is his retirement, and he wants to be able to sell it so he can get out of farming. He's farmed all his life and wants to retire.
I agree, but setback is not what's hurting him.
No.
His neighbors don't want anything on his property. He wants industrial, and they don't even want residential.
Well, my point was, that's his retirement. Whether, regardless of the circumstances, that is his retirement. That has been his plan when prices were lower. It's his plan today. So you brought that up earlier that, you don't know what, you hope they were planning. Yes, they were planning on that being their retirement. The value of their property going up, just like us, when our stock and our goes up, that's a good thing. So they're gonna
The
want
point
to do
I
that.
was making is, it's not government's responsibility to maximize profit for landowners.
I understand that.
But it's also our responsibility not to adversely affect it.
Yeah, it's a responsibility to ensure that your actions of your neighbor does not adversely affect the adjacent property owner. But other than that, we need to stay out of it, from a government standpoint.
So-
I'd like for us to, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, so my point is if you, the larger the buffer, the less developable land that farmer's gonna have to sell, and thus he's probably likely gonna get paid less than he would. Again, is that our problem? Yeah, we can debate that. But I think that's the situation, and I've talked to farmers who are landowners and even east of 95 that are very concerned about their ability to sell their land when they get to that point that they want to sell. And then, I don't know how much land is leased, but you've got to figure that in. There's more and more land that's being sold, and I think we heard a story about that before at another meeting about they'd wanted to buy land, but the farmer, wanted to sell it to somebody else for a higher price. So to me, the 75 takes up a lot more land, and if we wind up with the same number of houses, that just means they're going to need more land and go somewhere else to buy the houses, and the people are, so we're going to consume more land with bigger buffers. I understand there needs to be, some balance. I like that, whether it's 75, 35, I do like the ability to, if that's going to be a septic area, something for stormwater control, that we can use it for that. So I like that idea. I also like Mr. Essex's idea of how do we weigh that out and make it transitional. And I really, I'm really intrigued by the idea if we let the marketplace, decide what those buffers, if you want to, and I really hadn't thought about this until recently, but not all farmers have their land in one tract of land. So if they abut, he's got two tracts of land that butt each other, the one of them's going to have 75 and one of them would have less, whatever that is. So I want to make sure we're treating people fairly, but also in not harming them in their retirement. So again, it's a fine line we're walking, but I think to me 75 just seems like a lot. And I've talked to plenty of farmers who are for what's proposed now, the 35, with 10 foot of that being able to be used for, some other purpose that would be stormwater or septic field or whatever, and then a buffer in that 35 with canopies. And I'm assuming what you have in your example, if you go back one, Susie, yeah, so is that what would be proposed, the 3 canopy trees, or is that just an example?
So this is an example, but yeah,
Okay.
we can, that's movable. I think that's
Okay.
that's easier. That's low hanging fruit.
You just need
We
to
can
know
make that as dense or as less dense as anybody would want. We could give options for, once again, incentivizing a denser,
Okay.
a more densely planted area. And the type of plant material is probably going to be more, that's going to be more paramount than it is the density, because, not all, obviously, all plant material is not the same. If it's all pine trees and they grow, you're looking at seeing it's the trunk as opposed to the limbs doing the work for you when you're talking about spray drift or something of that nature. So it's,
Well, Butch, to your point, I actually had a farmer at one of our public meetings come up to me and he said, April, I don't put my field on the property line. And I was like, that's a good, as a visual, I needed to hear that because I didn't think about that. They're not running their fields right up to their property lines, just like builders are not typically putting their houses right on property lines. So it created an additional food for thought or visual for me that I hadn't had, that they're creating their own buffers naturally.
Right. You gotta have room to turn around and everything like that at the edge of the field. So I mean, same.
Right.
To your spot, there is somewhat of a buffer, but at the same time, you want to make sure that that buffer does its job. And mainly of trespassing, drift, whatever the noise, whatever the thing is, you want to make sure that buffer does its job, and does it well to protect both people, both parties.
And I agree, I don't want to see backyard to field either. Like, I think we've seen a couple issues of that, you know, whether it came across planning board or came here, that we're like, you know, we would rather see trees to separate. So I definitely agree that there should be some sort of a buffer. I think we just need to land on.
Do we have any idea how many of those nuisance complaints that there are currently?
That's something that Bryant Spivey could be better
Yeah.
weigh in on.
Yeah, we don't hear many of those types of complaints, saying from the operator of an agricultural use, that those are more, probably, Bryant's office probably does hear more about them, just because of, I mean, he's more in contact with them directly on a regular basis. We just don't hear, we don't hear a lot of those. Most of our complaints come to the actual use of the property versus a trespass or a concern about how their property's able, you know, a farm's able to function with development next door. We don't hear a tremendous amount about that.
So that's, I mean, I've heard I've heard those complaints, with one, traffic on the road, but two, you've got neighboring kids or with ATVs and decide they want to go ride on somebody else's property and tear it up. So I have heard the complaints on that side of things.
If I were to prioritize what the farm representative said, they're out of that 75 feet, said that's what they would prefer. But the 35-foot of vegetative tree buffer is absolute. They said we've got to have that vegetative separation. The next thing that's most important, it says we prefer to have no requirement for plantings 10 foot off the property line. If there's natural vegetation there now, leave it alone. Also, the 35 feet says we have no objection to natural vegetation there if it'll do the job. So you don't have to bear the burden and go back and dig it up and replant it with something new. The open space is the more flexible part. It said if you can find ways to incentivize use of that's reasonable to the homeowners and to the developer, that was the least important to them. So just put it in context. But I think that having options available and incentivizing these types of situations are the key here to addressing the concerns, the variety of concerns that have come up.
Well, I'll just state that I know a lot of farmers. Being in my District 3 is farm, you know, there's a lot of farms down there, and so I have friends and family in that industry. So I did spend a lot of time on the phone this weekend talking to those, and without me suggesting a number, this is what they said. The 35 number was the number that they offered up over and over to me. So that's just what my research came up with, that the 35 foot was the number that they could live with. So just throwing that out there.
And I would say that was the number I heard the most, but I do, the other piece of this is, you know, if we're talking about a place where we want firemen and teachers and that we want the affordable housing that's needed, it's just like anything, sidewalks, concrete, trees, buffers, I mean, it all costs something, and that means the cost of the house is going to go up. And are we driving the folks in those industries and service industries, are we driving the cost up so that really the affordable housing is not in Johnston County and people are moving elsewhere, much like they've seen in the folks in
And
Wake
by
County?
contrast, the people moving here are coming from up north in the Ohio Valley. You know, 90% of the houses being sold are going to people moving to this state. We are one of the highest migration states in the country. And people are moving here because of proximity to the Research Triangle. They can't afford the prices in the Research Triangle, so they come here because of that. the locals are the ones that are getting hurt by this because they can't afford the land prices. The farmer there that wants to expand his base, he can't afford to buy the land for farming. The person who wants a starter home here, it used to be $85,000 when I bought my first one, now I'm running $300,000 and up for a small house. That's an affordability issue that we as a county body are not gonna be able to affect very much, but we need to try to not add unnecessary cost to the product. But the macroeconomics here is something well beyond our control. That's gonna have to be done at a different level than at the county level.
We're not going to arrive at the perfect number, because everybody's got a different idea of what that perfect number is.
But I do think it's important we get it as close as possible, because it's not something that we can easily go back and change. Because if we, go to the extreme and, create larger buffers and then 3 years from now realize, this is really not working out, we're not being good stewards, we can't go back and reimburse those landowners and those
Right.
developers who lost out on that. So I think it's really important, we can always go up, but it's not like we can go here and go backwards, unfortunately, without major repercussions and being detrimental to our citizens that we didn't intend to.
Well, I think we
harm.
got really two opportunities here. We got to pick a number today to put in the draft. But the opportunity with that is, one, we've got public review, comment, public hearing. We can also get information from our staff that will help solidify all of those, and we can see where the public truly is, and we can hear from farmers on both sides of the number there. And people would need to show up at our public hearing and voice their opinions on that. But I do think hearing from our environmental health department, some other examples of the poorly worded incentive
Transitional buffer.
Transitional, options on there that may, and whether it's varies by use, I think those are things that we can consider to maybe come up, the ones that need more buffer,
Right.
get more buffer, and the ones that where somebody's able to do it. And I'm still intrigued by the market deciding, but I don't know how tricky that. I look at our legal staff and I don't see a smile, so I think that means that might be more difficult than we think it is, but.
Well, and I'd like to add in the option of having the neighboring landowners be able to agree to a waiver.
Well, that's what I meant, the market.
Okay.
The market thing,
That's
yeah.
an interesting concept.
And because that even goes this way, there are a lot of landowners / farmers will say, they may be one or may be the other, that own two pieces of land or multiple pieces of land, and they only want to sell one of those parcels of the land. So then we would be asking them to buffer from their own operation where they may not even want to. And so I think that's where that agreement really would pay off.
All right, do we have a consensus on a number to input based on the fact that it's going to go out to the public for further review, and we'll have another public hearing, and we can adjust that once we get all the information back from legal and look at the different options? But for today, we need to plug something in. Do we have a consensus on what that something would be?
I'm good with 35 in the recommendation.
When you say that, I'm assuming the recommendation of the planting area in the first 20 to 25 feet, whether it's already there or will be created, and then leaving 10 feet unplanted immediately, correct?
Yeah, that
Okay.
one's up on the screen.
I just wanted, again, to
Yeah,
overly
thank you.
explain and clarify, because I do think it's important that we accomplish creating those buffers between properties. And so I would also agree with the 35 feet based on staff recommendation of those two caveats.
We haven't talked about 50.
I would say that's kind of where I was going to say was 50.
So the priority from the farm community would be a total of 40. You got 10 foot off the property line, and you got 35 feet of vegetative buffer. Then you got the open area, they said it could be subject to sacrifice here. We had our priority.
No, I definitely agree that this should be included in what is required as far as open space. And Bryson, just to clarify, our setbacks would still be another 15 feet off of this 35 feet for building setback, correct? I just want to make sure we're all hearing the same thing.
I want to,
Because that would make it
for
50.
lack of answering a question with a question, I'd rather defer to legal, because here's.
I was gonna say, on the screen, it says none.
Yeah, I think your
Okay.
setback, your setback is gonna be your setback. If you can't build in, you can't build in, and that serves the purpose. But if you add a setback that's beyond that buffer width, or that's in addition to the buffer width, then
Change the buffer.
I think we're maybe reaching a legal threshold we don't want to reach.
That's why I just wanted to
That was on.
clarify, because I want to make sure we're not creating a second issue. But I think that's good for landowners to know too, that if it is truly a buffer, because I fight this all the time with people who have, wetland areas, they're on an acre and a half, but they've got, buffers and certain things, and you can't make them understand. They can't put their extra garage or their building and things back there in these riparian buffers, and then they don't want to hear it, and they want that space, they want that acreage, but they don't want to hear that they can't use their buffer for whatever they want to use it for.
It's got to be reserved
So
somewhere
I
in the
think
deeding
that's-
process. that
exactly.
It's understood by all parties what it can and cannot be used
Right,
for.
I think the consumer needs to know that too. Like, yes, I have all this large backyard and now I've got a buffer there, but I need to recognize that I can't use it for what I want to use
Can't
it
get
for.
to the swimming pool, can't go
What's good for
a
the goose
deck or a
has to be,
garage.
yeah,
I'm just gonna say, good luck with that.
good for the gander.
So today, are we going to just leave it as a one-size-fits-all, or are we even going to talk about in a draft to have different setbacks for different types of operations? And also, are we going to look at Michelle's option of putting that language in the final plat? Could that all be part of this?
So the low-hanging fruit is that language in a final plat's easy.
Okay.
You have a separate and distinct ordinance that's in place outside of the UDO that's easily changed.
Okay.
So that's really low-hanging fruit. We can bring you back what various options or alternatives look like from other communities, how they address it, even going to the type of agricultural use that is in place. Absolutely do that. We'll also explore some language to, as it's been said a couple of times, incentivize maybe a wider buffer, right? And what that looks like, and also the use of that buffer, uses within that buffer, whether it's septic or stormwater control measures or open space, and we can also have that incentive be tied to, currently we have a mandate today for 15% open space or a fee in lieu. Maybe if you provide we do a pro rata calculation for a fee in lieu if they provide some of that open space and that's dedicated to that buffer, right? We can make that different, because that fee now has changed to $1,200 per lot. So that could have some impact and could be seen as an incentive from the development community, and once again, still help offset the cost of the buffer if it needs to be truly established. If there's not existing vegetation, then that can offset some of that development cost there by not having to pay that additional fee in lieu. I mean, just some thoughts, but we can bring that back to you.
We got a lot of different avenues that we've talked about here that could possibly work. Does the board want to table this portion of it and let them come back with some more information and we can give them direction then? Or do you just want to plug a placeholder number in at this point and move on? Regardless, in the interest of time, we need to move on with the rest of this.
I would say we need to plug a number in, and then we can still, discuss it and everything.
All right, so what's that number?
I'd say 50. My vote's 50.
Okay.
Your vote, Chris.
I was at 35.
Based on everyone I talked to.
35.
35
With
was what
incentives.
everybody told me, so, that I talked to.
I'm going with the staff recommendation of 35.
Okay. Mr. Godwin?
I think the comment made about, I'd prefer 75, in order to get a number in, we can ratchet that as we get input and clarification, so I'd go with 35,
Okay, all right.
but with an asterisk.
General consensus is the board is.
Say mine has an asterisk.
It's
Yeah.
35 with I can't say the word asterisk. Yeah, there you go. A little thing beside it saying, come back and look at this again. All right, let's move on to the next part. Let me pause for just a second. Is everybody good? You need a break, or can we keep rolling?
Can I have a
I
quick
need to
break?
run to the restroom.
All right, let's take a 5-minute recess, okay, and then we'll come back in just a second. Before we go. And then- one additional portion that you're going to introduce, and then we'll move on with the regular scheduled portion.
That's correct. We want, in order to make the best use of our legal team's time, we did want to kind of jump ahead. So I want to talk about a couple of things. One is nonconformities. There's some legislation that was approved. This goes back to the downzoning legislation back from 2024. We just want to make this board aware that there's adjustments or has to be adjustments to our nonconformities language, and that's represented in the UDO and in practice with regulatory requirements. With regard to nonconformities, non-residential development or any non-residential district is, we cannot create standards that would create nonconformities with existing development. So we're just wanted the public to know that we are aware of that. We are taking that into consideration with the standards that are have been included in the UDO, and we will ensure that as we get closer to the adoptive date. Additionally, there's some more recent legislative or some recent bills that have been ratified, and these are House Bill 369 and Senate Bill 445. House Bill 369 essentially it took away the ability of a local government to create standards that put a minimum number of off-street parking spaces on new development, and that is something that's been I guess an initiative that's been out there for some time now, and it finally gained traction to where it was the current bill was signed into law. So that will be removed. So that's going to be a departure from the prior version of the proposed UDO that will be removed. Additionally, there's some language in Senate Bill 445 which directly relates to accessory dwelling units and how they're regulated. There's some language, and I know our legal counsel is looking at this and evaluating its impact for us in general, but we think we fit into these established standards where we think we are okay, but we just want to make sure they take another look at it just as a safeguard. So those are the two biggest pieces of legislation. I think at this point, Chad, do you know any others that we may want to mention?
Other than the ones that are in your slides,
Yeah, anything beyond the ones in the slide. We do have others noted in the slide.
Yeah.
That was more for informational purposes, but.
yeah. No, that's all at this time that we're aware of.
All right. Any questions for the planning director on those?
Well, that was one of my concerns about the accessory dwelling units is gonna be by right, so they're, well, automatically allowing the density to increase on some of these lots and the amount of, I guess, impervious surface as well. But that's one more example of how the General Assembly is making uniform decisions for all 100 counties. You know, there's obviously a good out there, but it's not necessarily the best thing from a trying to manage your resources standpoint.
You know, obviously, that accessory dwelling units, the language is, it still has to conform to other development regulations, right? We understand that, but, so the restraints of a lot size and other regulations placed on that lot could eliminate the ability to have an ADU or limit the size in general, whether we can limit that size or not.
I hadn't really thought about that, but that is very interesting, because if your impervious surfaces is limited, you're adding driveway and an ADU, something's got to get, the house has got to get smaller,
Yeah.
something's got to
Got to
give.
give, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, I like the idea of the ADUs. I mean, I've got one at my house in the town of Clayton, but it's an interesting
The parking
question.
issue has been a real topic with fire departments in this county. It says when they go into subdivision, then if people are parking on the shoulder, because there's not enough parking at the residences, that they got situations where they can barely get through with their trucks. And that is a concern that came up, I've heard on more than one occasion.
Yeah.
That's-
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, both of those issues are something we're seeing be a lot more strenuous in covenants, restrictive covenants as are getting recorded to not allow for any off-street parking and that type of thing. And then I'm also a proponent for ADUs. I feel like it's a way, I don't foresee it hitting our area like it has many others as far as them being used for short-term rentals and that type of thing as much as it is helping with the affordability crisis. It's, luckily, I think it's a blessing that so many families are going back towards multi-generational living and things like that. And it's no different than us all growing up on our grandparents' farm where there was 3 houses on one farm because your great aunt and your uncle and everybody else lived there. And so I think we're seeing it be more for those purposes versus short-term rentals like I think a lot of other areas are seeing. So. just
All right, any other
thought.
discussions with the legislative updates?
No, I would just say maybe there's something to consider, because I know I have, and just true confessions, there's a subdivision in Clayton that I was a part of approval, and there's a lot of on-street parking, and I don't know how in the world you would get a fire engine down the street without scraping paint off there. So I don't know if we look at our standards, with wider street sections, if it's gonna be on-street something, because this one-way traffic at best.
If I'm not mistaken, you only typically see that in subdivisions with sewer.
Yeah, yes, that would be.
So there's, and you mentioned street standards, that's another thing, because there's legislation that's been ratified where we can't, as municipality, whereas a county, since we don't own and operate public right-of-ways, and we're precluded from doing so by statute, our standards for streets, subdivision streets, or streets in general cannot be any different than DOT, or cannot be greater than DOT. So they're more restrictive, so just want to put that out there, want to make sure I am right.
Thank you for clarifying.
All right, let's go back to our next section now.
Yes, sir, this hopefully won't take long. Electric barbed wire fences, and I know this seems kind of odd, but we wanted to speak with the board about this. This is a new provision in the UDO from our current adopted land development code. We don't typically generally restrict or mandate or regulate fences at all, as it is, but electric and barbed wire fences are something that's a little concerning, especially as we have this agricultural residential district, and you have more densely developed neighborhoods. We just wanted to get the board's feedback as we've had some, I guess, issues raised with regulating these types of fences at all. But we believe there is a potential harm to those who live adjacent to properties where they may utilize these. And once again, we're talking about in major development, in major residential development, not in out in the more rural areas of the county and this haphazard or sparse development. So looking for some direction.
This was a contentious issue, particularly in AR. Most farmers out there said, I don't need a permit to go put up an electric fence. Does it require a permit now?
If you're a bona fide farm, nothing in ordinance requires that. No, we don't require
Okay.
permits for fences at all today.
I'm glad to hear that, because I put up an electric fence 2 days ago.
So, but the way it reads, they're both allowed in for agricultural activities and industrial activities.
Yes.
It's just in, is that major subdivisions?
Major subdivisions that's our biggest concern. That's the intent here, right? Is we have, when you create a major subdivision, you have a residential community now, and it should really act in that manner. Barbed wire fences, obviously a shock, or electric fences, obviously a shock hazard is a concern, especially for smaller, younger children. Barbed wire fences, obviously that's another concern. We're talking about razor sharp wire here, or extremely hazardous wire there that, once again, children are the bigger concern. And it could be not even that they're trying to cross property lines, it could just be an accidental fall or something of that nature. So that's where staff is coming from here, but we wanted to put this before the board just to give some direction.
I would just say, I don't want to get involved in the farmer's decision of, it may be electrical on some piece, and if it goes through a swamp, wet woods or something, that electrical's not going to work, and needs barbed wire, or,
Yeah.
but and even in a subdivision, I know they used to have chain link fence and run the electric wire at the bottom of it, so my dog wouldn't dig out back in the day, so I don't, I mean, I get the safety part of it, but the barbed wire in a subdivision doesn't make a lot of sense,
Yeah,
but.
it's food for thought. Do we want to leave it to, individuals to make a sound decision and think of their neighbor or ramifications, or do we want to regulate it as?
If it's for major subdivisions, wouldn't that also be something potentially would be a HOA issue?
That's,
Could be, yeah, absolutely.
But I think it bears us repeating that this does not affect farms, this does not affect people in the county that are not in a subdivision. This is for new major subdivisions.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay,
Well,
just wondered.
it could affect them in an existing subdivision if the fence isn't already there.
Gotcha, yeah.
Right. So they would have to come get a permit.
And in which the covenants or the covenants have expired or there is no HOA.
That's true, yeah.
I mean, how many complaints have we heard about barbed wire fence?
Necessarily complaints, only a couple, and those have only really been associated more so that was secondary to the keeping of animals and management of waste from those animals. It hasn't been specifically the offenses themselves. That was more of a something subsequent to the initial complaint.
Actually, I think the most complaints I've got is where a farmer has had somebody else come and lay something over run over the electric or take it down and come onto their property, so.
Yeah, so once again, it's not impacting bona fide agricultural operations,
Yeah,
and that's not the intent. We're really speaking, we're more concerned about residential development.
Does barbed wire fences include what's also referred to as razor ribbon?
Wire. I mean, if you ask me my interpretation, I would say it would be, yes.
What are you putting razor wire around it?
We use that quite extensively in the prison system.
All right, so is there any interest in leaving this in the UDO? If there is, then we need to give some direction how to proceed. If not, just strike it and move on.
I'm fine with taking it out. I mean, it's,
I have to,
I say take it out.
yeah, I just don't
okay.
know why we'll hear, I guess we won't hear about it if we take it out now. It's not in the draft, but.
That's right.
I was kind of surprised when I saw it in here for discussion.
All right, everybody's good with that, let's move on.
All right.
We're taking that out.
That was more recent revelation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, on to our major subdivision review process, and I'll be extremely succinct here. As this board knows, our major subdivisions are the creation of or division of a tract of land into 4 or greater lots. So anything 3 lots or less is considered a minor, and that minor is an administrative level approval. All majors, regardless 4 lots to whatever, is currently that's a evidentiary hearing for us today, or a quasi judicial proceeding. So with this, that we are more so, and I'm not saying we're truly the exception to the rule, but there's a trend, and it is a growing trend, where conventional major subdivision where there is no allocation of infrastructure, and specifically sewer, or there's no legislative component to that, meaning a rezoning or conditional zoning to allow for greater density. Communities are moving to and have moved to an administrative process. That administrative process, very much like the evidentiary or quasi-judicial process, is standards-based. You have standards. It is subdivision as a matter of right. If, once again, barring any discussion with regard to allocation of resource or infrastructure, and staff reviews it. In this case, it would be our technical review committee consisting of various departments within the county and some external partners, primarily NCDOT. And today, we move that forward to the planning board. So we've heard time and time again that, and we have this public hearing, and we allow folks to come up and speak with regard to the proposed subdivision. And just from the planning board's perspective, it's kind of different, right? You have these standards, and in some cases, you know it may not be the most appropriate place or location for a major subdivision, but once again, we've established it as a standards-based decision in this quasi-judicial manner. And as long as there's no evidence that shows the developers shouldn't be entitled to, the applicant shouldn't be entitled to an approval, you're obligated to approve it. Administrative works in the same manner. So in the UDO, proposed UDO as it is today, we have established this as an administrative level review for anything fewer than 50 lots and/or public sewer is requested. So with that, keeping that in mind, what is the board's feedback? And I have provided for you a spreadsheet that shows from 2019 through current year, all subdivisions that have been considered that were greater than 50 lots. And those are on that sheet of paper, and they are highlighted in yellow, just to give you an idea of, in that time span, how many you've seen. You will notice in those earlier years, 19, maybe even through 21, there was a pretty large number, a larger number than from that time to now to current day. That is a result of multiple things. We made some changes to our UDO. There were, I think you also saw its normal ebb and flow in market, so on and so forth, and probably more a growing interest in some of our municipalities and development there, which has taken some of that interest away from here in county jurisdiction or unincorporated areas. So looking for some feedback.
I'll start off if I may. My first concern here is that by making fewer than 50 administrative review, all public comment opportunities seems to have been eliminated. And I don't think that's going to go well with the citizens, because we have heard repeatedly they want more opportunity to comment on these growth issues. But if we're not going to go before the planning board or the commissioners for that respect, what is the opportunity for the general public to bring forth their concerns or comments about anything falling into that category?
That's my concern.
So we can essentially, we can provide a mechanism for the public to provide comment on any development plan. So we still would notify the adjoining property owners. And for us today, we use, although it's not spelled out specifically in general statute, we use a buffer of 150 feet. We can increase that if we need to, but from a procedural perspective, we use 150 feet of that property, and we notify everybody that this is development, give them plat. We can provide in that notification a mechanism to submit any comment or concerns they have.
And who do they hold accountable for that decision, that final decision? Because they don't have an elected official to hold accountable. You know, that's part of what they want, is accountability here.
Yeah,
We're held
today,
accountable regardless.
Yeah, but today you're delegating that role or that decision to the planning board. So they're appointed, they're not elected. So it's a difficult situation. I think there's an expectation of when someone comes to a planning board meeting and they just don't want, there's no argument or no evidence-based argument for the subdivision not being approved. They just don't want it there. They don't think it's appropriate, and for whatever reason. There's an expectation that it's probably not going to happen, or possibly not going to happen.
All right, well, let's raise another issue here that I keep hearing from citizens out there. They feel like that we need more resource-based capacity in this decision process. Do we have the water? Do we have the sewer? Do we have the school capacity? Do we have the road capacity? I know we can't assess impact fees, majority of that other than system development fees, but can we put anything in there that the capacities in that regard that are impacted by residential development can be considered?
Is each box checked?
So I will say, you can, in a sense. One is you can create policy, whether it's water and or sewer. And that's one. We already have existing residential sewer service policies in place. There was allocation policies that were brought to the board previously, and we didn't act on those as of yet. Those are still under advisement. But we can do that. There is some hesitation, so schools is a great example because there's some case law that kind of supports this. Essentially, adequate public facilities. You could have an APF type standard or ordinance, but it can't be tied back to any type of remuneration or capacity, if you want to call it, an
Yeah,
impact
you
fee.
can't charge any
You
kind of
can't do
fee
that.
for it.
Plus, there's got to be some basis for that, right? It's got to be, is there a CIP or capital improvements plan that we can lean on with regard to school construction and or providing adequate facilities for schools, as well as, this goes back, is there a measure for, if we're talking about adequate facilities for fire and EMS? There's got to be, in my opinion, and I'll allow legal staff to chime in on this, if they care to, there's got to be some kind of quantitative measure or threshold here. It can't really be, it can't be arbitrary.
That's what I was going to say.
And it can't be discretionary.
Yeah, each of those check boxes would also then have to have an actual formula to say what the schools are overcrowded, what does that mean? The water is out, what does that mean? All of those things, they couldn't be just say, well, I heard the school was overcrowded. Because I know we hear that argument a lot, but I do think those are not bad arguments to have, but I do see that open up a whole nother box of how do we then assign what that quantitative number is.
Well, that's a big shortcoming in our process, because we just went through a drought that drove home the point that, we got limited some water right now. And the cost to provide additional water is going to be exorbitant. It's going to drive up everybody's bill currently if we build this Richland Brood project. You're already hearing from the citizens out there, we can't no longer afford to live here with the property taxes and the utility fees that we're paying. Well, it's only going to get worse. What's driving that? That's growth that's driving it. Growth is the root of all of these issues, challenges as well as benefits. What can we legitimately consider if we've had subdivision approved in districts that had overcapacity schools? Is that a wise choice? We're slowly catching up with that now, but we're allocating water and sewer out. Sewer, basically right now, we're not providing any sewer to residential out in AR districts outside of towns. But can we effectively make that a policy, or is that just a unspoken rule at this point? Because our cost of community services, that shows us that we need more balance in our development profile, less residential and more job producing growth. But if we ain't got the water or sewer capacity, then it's not going to do us any good. We put it all into housing, then we're just digging our financial hole deeper. And the General Assembly, like I said, they may limit to how much we can raise property taxes or reduce them. They're taking control away from local government to balance their revenue stream. Those are factors we have to consider, that we need more consideration in here in what's going to be impacted by future development.
I don't disagree with you, but the mechanisms have to be in here, and there's also policy. Policy's
Well,
gonna
can
have
we
to go
bring
in.
forth some mechanisms that would allow us to have that additional control that are supportable and defensible from a legal standpoint?
I mean, we can certainly explore that. I'll let legal chime in if they'd like.
And so that's what actually Chad and I were just whispering about, was with regards to what you can do related to that. And if you look at the UDO as it stands today, with the intent section in 14-131, it talks about those kinds of things that Mr. Stovall has just mentioned. The issue is, and what we have talked about previously, is there's no standards attached to that, which is what makes it more difficult to enforce. Because if you look at it, what it says right now is that and this is in the subdivision section of the UDO, it talks about adequate and efficient access and coordination of streets, water and sewer, parks, schools, playgrounds, and other public requirements and facilities where appropriate. But yet there's not standards that are related to that. So from an enforceability perspective, it's very difficult. And so if things were to remain where it is, if we kept it at this quasi-judicial process, we need to have standards related to that, so substantial competent material evidence could be presented to meet those standards or not, whichever side is testifying. But that's sort of the issue. So when we talk about school capacities and that sort of thing, there's language in the ordinances that exist today relating to schools, which is why in the planning board meetings, you have the data and the information related to school capacity, but there's nothing else that goes with that. And so those are the kinds of things that you would have to look at if that's the direction that you wanted to go, is to have some standards that attached with that. I don't know, Chad, if you've got something you want to add.
No, I think that's right. I think that, now these subdivisions are heard in a quasi-judicial setting, but most of the standards are objective standards, right? And so, or not all of them are. So I think if the desire is to keep it as a quasi-judicial process at the planning board, I think some subjective standards around some of these things need to be put into the ordinance so that applicants can present evidence as to whether or not they meet those requirements, and opponents can present evidence as to why they don't. I will say, for whatever it's worth, the environment in our appellate courts has become challenging with regards to quasi-judicial decisions that have been denied. The standard is pretty much that, if they present any evidence, that's sufficient to meet their burden. And so I just say that to say that a lot of places are getting away from the quasi-judicial process for decisions like this because of that. But that's just anecdotal, something for you to think about. But yes, what Ms. Lusser said, I think if you're going to keep it in this process, there needs to be some more subjective standards identified around those sorts of issues that you're talking about, Mr. Stovall.
More objective standard.
I'm sorry, subjective standards.
Subjective?
To
Well-
give you some discretion.
Right.
Okay. Well, I'm concerned, we're talking about removing the public from this process, or having a public forum where they can come in and voice their concerns. They may come in and not have a basis to do that, but we got standards that says that, and the developer has to present data that shows that he is going to address these potential shortcomings in his project in terms of our ability to serve it, be it utilities, schools, DSS services, court services, all that is going to the roof right now in terms of demand for services. EMS, fire departments, et cetera. It gives the impression that we're allowing development to occur without an actual ability to serve it effectively. I think we need to be in a better position to assure the public that we're not making decisions in a vacuum, that we are in fact taking objectified metrics in consideration to approve these things.
And I think from the legal perspective, the way that the law works is if the applicant comes in and meets the burden, in other words, if the applicant comes in and provides competent material, substantial evidence that they meet the standards that are outlined in the ordinance, they're entitled to the permit unless there is evidence presented contra. And what we have experienced most occasions is that there is not any evidence that's submitted contra that would meet the legal standard in order to support a decision to not approve a development. That's essentially the way that it typically has gone, at least in my experience.
So tell me what that means for the bottom line here. We can't do this?
No, I don't think that's the answer. I think the answer is you've got to decide what you want. Most local governments have moved to this administrative level of review because there's standards, and you either meet the standards or you don't meet the standards. There's not any discretion that's associated with that.
But you state what the standards are.
You do, that is correct.
Well, that's the whole point of this UDO, isn't it? to set those standards?
Yes, that's correct. And so that's why a lot of people moved away from having the planning board review, is because the administrative standards say what you have to have in order for development to be approved, and you either have it or you don't have it. And if, for example, if they don't have it, the developer does not have it, then they have appeal rights and those sorts of things. And the same for affected adjacent property owners. They would have the same rights for appeal on an administrative decision as well. And with the new budget bill, that appeal can go directly to Superior Court, does not have to go through the Board of Adjustment anymore. So there are remedies that are available. I know in other counties, what has been done on the administrative review process is they don't solicit the public input like you do on a quasi judicial hearing, but the technical review committee meetings are open and people can go and observe those meetings when these subdivisions are being considered. So I think the big issue and what's before you now is, do you want to have administrative review at any level? And if you do, what does that look like? The other question is, if you don't make any changes with regards to that, where do you want these things to go? Do you want them to stay with the planning board? Do you want them to come to the Board of Commissioners? And those are the decisions, I think, that we're looking for at this point. And, you know, the quasi judicial hearings, you think about that, that's sort of like a court proceeding. The rules of evidence don't apply quite the same way, but it's like a court proceeding. And so it's not legislative like your rezonings and your conditional rezonings. And so
So is that our decision for the planning board the way that is now? Could we change that to
you could,
legislative? Okay.
well, for the subdivision review piece, yes, but typically the way subdivision review works is it's either quasi judicial or it's administrative. I've not seen legislative, but
Yeah, I don't think the subdivision review process could be a legislative process. It would either be an administrative approval or a quasi judicial.
Subdivision consideration could be or subdivision as a consideration could be part of a legislative process, but a separate and distinct legislative process, such as conditional zoning.
Right.
So that subdivision plan could be submitted as part of that conditional zoning. Now you can make that decision, but it's not.
I was specifically asked to raise these issues by the chairman of the planning board, Tim Little, but he says he feels like they're hamstrung in terms of what they can and cannot do, because says we know that we're overburdening a lot of our services, but we can't do anything about it in terms of having no authority to do anything about it.
I think there's a lot of truth to that, because there's not standards in the ordinance that give them the flexibility to make decisions otherwise.
Who sets these standards?
You do.
Then why can't we put something in there that's got some teeth in it?
You could. You could. It just, you have to be careful about what they are and how they work, but yes, you could.
Well, that's why we got attorneys.
Wasn't it the Senate bill, was it 257, that allowed the applicant to move at declination, move directly to the Superior Court?
Correct. And there's also a mandatory attorney's fees provision
Oh,
if
that
they are
was recent,
successful.
But
Yeah.
has there been enough case law to establish the mood of the court? I mean, is it often overturned?
So I would say that recently the mood of the court is very applicant-friendly. Typically, and a lot of that has to do with the way that the process works. You know, it can't, the evidence contra can't be not in my backyard. It has to be attached to a measurable standard, like stormwater runoff or, you know, access and circulation within the development, those kinds of things. It can't be just because I don't want it here.
Right.
Vice Chairman Lawler, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I got a lot to unpack here.
Okay.
So the first question for Brass, I thought there was a provision in the new ordinance for a public meeting, maybe not a public hearing, but a public meeting
For
on
subdivisions.
subdivisions, yeah.
We have, yeah, I mean, it'll be a public process, but it's not a public hearing.
I think what
is
he's
that
talking
what the
to is about the developer meeting.
So the developer, yeah.
Before-
So,
yeah,
yes, there is
before
a required
review.
neighborhood, or a required meeting.
Okay.
Neighborhood
that the
meeting might be
applicant
the,
Would have to conduct.
Okay.
It's not us, we're not organizing it, we're not having necessarily direct involvement in it. We can certainly attend and listen to concerns and relay those concerns to the technical review committee or board, but no, it's driven by that.
And I think there are
And it's
probably
it's a
many
mandate.
local governments who do that, and from what I've seen and heard from others is that there are some issues, and I think when we've seen it here on our planning board, when there is a community meeting, a lot of times some issues get resolved. But I did want to say, at least in experience of these three in the middle here, we had a case that was brought to us that we used sewer capacity or lack thereof schools to deny, so it can be done. It wasn't challenged, but I mean, it can be done, and then also have, and I don't know what the current situation in Orange County is, which we are the polar opposite of, but I believe they have adequate facilities ordinance, and they were particularly looking at schools, and they have this on the books, but they have not used it because of fear of being sued over it. So I think, you know, we can, and we had a lot of conversation earlier about that, you know, the fear of being sued, but I think that's, it may be on the books in places, but I don't know who's, and Mr. Essex may know some folks who have it and are using it, but I don't know that anybody who's applying that now because of the fear of, and I would say the current environment we're in with the folks in Raleigh is probably not going to get better anytime soon. And then I will now piggyback on something Commissioner Stovall started. So I have my list over here too. I mean, I like the idea of us being able to consider and I had written schools, water, sewer, emergency services. I had prime farmland. I know we've got that on the layer on our GIS now. And also, you know, we got the cost of community service along with a model that we were looking to, I won't say make a decision, but these are all going to be part, as I think all of these should be part of our process. And so how do we
I agree.
legally get that in there and be able to make a basis, hey, I mean, we don't have any sewer. That was legitimate when, whatever, 5-6 years ago, we were down to 100,000 gallons or 200 or whatever it was, and we really didn't have it to be given out. But I do think that we need to consider that. And again, I guess moving on to the next thing is the planning board itself. I do feel like that is an opportunity for the public to come and be heard. I mean, they may go to a meeting that they may or probably not send an email in, but there are a lot of folks who will show up, if not to get up to the podium and speak, they will show up to, and, you know,
Get
just
more
to know that they're there, yeah, for more information and know that they're opposing things. So I don't know what that is, if there's, and I was just running through these numbers, and if I look at it, I don't even want to try to do the averages, but if you use 10 or 15 as the line for staff administrative approval, and then have another tier that's for planning board, and then 50 or whatever and above for us to hear.
I did the math, it was 82% this year and 89% last year would have been administratively approved.
Yeah, so that's
Or
what,
dealt with.
yeah, because I was looking at I looked at it the other way. We would have had 3, 5, 4, instead of above 51, 13, 6, and 15, so not
You
huge
did my
numbers.
math.
Yeah, to figure how many would come to us, but, you know, when you start talking, I mean, I really feel that is an important part of the process, that people are able to be heard at a public forum rather than sending in an email or even going to a public meeting. I think they all have their place, but that was a concern of mine as well. So I think that I covered all my scribbly notes on there. But I do like the 50, I guess it's 50 and above, you know, coming to us, but somehow find another middle ground so it's not all administrative. But, I mean, again, you can look at the numbers and what our staff can handle and what needs to go.
Yeah, I like the idea that you said of having 10 or more go to the planning board. So like the planning
Yeah.
board would get 10 to 50.
I split the numbers up between 10 and 50. Once I did 10, and that's a pretty low number, that's less than 10, but 15, you know,
I mean, you could almost use our now identifying 19 lots to, with regards to, you know, now the trigger is you're gonna have to have stormwater ponds and things like that. You
Okay,
could almost use
that's-
that as our trigger number.
Yeah.
Because I agree with
Yeah.
both of you. I like for the development community and for the public community to be able to be in the same room.
I agree.
And, you know, it's, don't get me wrong, there's always a lot of people that show up and they're just against any neighborhood going in regardless. But I've also seen it welcomed by developers and builders when they say, listen, I just want a buffer, or can you just make sure that this is handled?
They make
And the developer-
compromises.
And everybody compromises and everybody feels good about it. I mean, it doesn't make sense to just say no, and especially if we can get in a room and everybody agree that, you know, this makes sense for all parties. I think it's the best for the citizens.
In theory, it would be much more efficient if we could quantify all the criteria within the various categories to say it either meets this or it doesn't. And then administratively, he could just check the
Check
boxes.
the boxes.
But that still leaves the public feeling helpless. I don't have a choice, you know?
Or voice.
Yeah,
And
or
to
voice.
Michelle's point, I think it's important that we give them that voice.
They want to be heard.
It makes us
but
better.
We
Right.
need to be able to articulate to the public, here's the criteria that we must take into consideration. We can't deviate from that. That needs to be understood first and foremost.
Well, they say that at the beginning of every planning board meeting, we are making this decision based on X, Y, Z, that these are the criteria that it has to meet. And then, I mean, you hear, I mean, Michelle can testify to this more than anybody, but you hear everything and then some as to why they feel like it should not be approved. But, you know, I think the planning board does a good job of saying, like, we can't turn down things just because you feel like it's gonna add traffic, or the schools are at capacity because we're constantly building new schools, or we're redistricting. And so I think the planning board does a good job of that. I think we can find a meeting of the minds here.
Yeah, I agree.
And I know we compare ourselves to Brunswick County a lot. I looked at what they do, and I don't think this is necessarily a time we need to follow their lead, but they do have staff approval up through 100 lots and with a required neighborhood meeting, and 101 lots gets planning board review and then a path to the commissioners. But I'm just saying that for comparison's sake, that we do look at what other counties do a lot. I don't think that necessarily means we need to follow what they do.
Yeah, I think Brunswick County recently changed, I mean, it used to not go to the commissioners at all, and then the Friends in Raleigh decided for the commissioners that they would, I don't know what size their major subdivision is, but whatever major subdivision
Anything
is in
greater than
Brunswick.
10.
Okay, so now that greater than 10 goes to the commissioners in Brunswick County now.
So I think really what you're talking about is just deciding what the numbers look like. I mean, delegating the staff approval is no different than we delegate the tax collector and a lot of other people to carry out tasks based on the guidelines that are in place. And so, you know, what that number looks like. The other thing that I think is very important, though, is for people to understand, to have realistic expectations, because you have to have a legal reason to deny something. I can't, just because Patrick doesn't like it, doesn't mean that's a reason to stop something from happening. And I know that's hard for, you know, for people sometimes, and I understand that. You know, they're passionate about, they don't want to see something going in a certain area, but, you know, there's also an expectation of that person who owns that property to be able to do something with that if they choose to do so. So, it's called property rights. So.
And we still, as staff, along with our public utilities colleagues, we've got we'll have work to do as we kind of narrow some of this information down, some of these requirements down, and we've got to do some work on policies, right? I mean, we know
Originally, you
it's
had
gonna.
water and sewer in here. Why did you remove water from consideration?
Because typically sewer's really the bigger driver, more often than not, and that's where you're gonna see most of your requests is.
Yeah, but water is limited in terms of availability.
I don't disagree with you, but it's just not, it's typically not the norm for some reason.
I want to make sure we got checks and balances in place, so we're not overcommitting ourselves on the water side, because, you know, we can't meet peak demand now. We're having to rely on outside purchase agreements to meet peak demand days. You know, so to me, that suggests right there, we need to be monitoring this a lot more closer than perhaps we are all made aware of.
All right, so do we have a direction for staff on this particular section? Or do you don't have what you need yet, do we?
It sounds like up to, April's suggestion up to 19, sounds like people would be okay with an administrative decision, maybe 20 to 49, planning board, and 50 and above go to the county commissioners. But I do think we still need to work on those numbers of being part of the boxes that need to be checked,
Yeah,
whether it's the water
standards.
capacity, sewer capacity, school
I
capacity,
agree.
all of those things.
I still like the idea of even if they're 50 to still go to the planning board, like how all the rezonings still go to the planning
With
board.
the recommendation.
With the recommendation.
Uh-huh.
I still would like for that to still go to the planning board as well, and
agree.
us. If it's 50.
Yeah. I just want to ensure that the public has an opportunity to meaningfully contribute.
Yes.
Right, that's what I was just
Yep.
saying, like, sometimes the public can get those questions and stuff answered at a planning board meeting before it comes to us. And so that's just why I would suggest still leaving the 50 plus still in the planning board review.
Okay.
That's a good idea.
All right.
Is everybody good with that?
Yeah, you got that?
Okay.
Got that?
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to the next one.
So the final item, this should be fairly quick, and this is just really more for informational purposes than needing feedback. And this was not indicated in the original or in the prior version of the UDO vape shops. So our public health department has asked us to consider vape shops as a use and some standards, especially separation from other uses. So we are evaluating that, and just some feedback from this board if you'd like to give feedback. We see buffered, or separation requirements or buffer distances range anywhere from 500 feet to 2,000 feet for schools, daycares, public parks, churches, and playgrounds. We'll continue to research that. We'll come back with a reasonable and effective standard, but obviously, vape shops are regulated based on the type of products they sell by the state and who they sell those to. So, but we do want to respond to our public health department and their request and explore that and make sure we've covered ourselves there.
So there's not a number we could say, put in the draft ordinance today?
I mean, certainly you could. I mean, you could put 5,000 feet knowing, or, 1,000 feet knowing that it's not applicable to any existing vape shops in county jurisdiction today as they would fall under that nonconformities.
What
like
zoning
most of them are
classification
in
do they
this-
currently fall under, just
And
GB?
Typically, general business is gonna be it. Potential, even community business, depending on the size. These are small facilities. They're not massive facilities, so they could fit in that same community business as well.
I just know in the past, we had a situation come up where somebody was looking at putting a business or structure beside a dance studio, for instance. And one of our qualifiers was if you don't tell us what it's gonna be, then it could be potentially a vape shop, which we would not like to see beside a daycare and dance facility. However, I'm thinking of the strip malls where we really don't have that type of control because they're gonna come in
Right.
with just retail services, which they would then fall under, is my understanding,
That's
with
what we were
GB
just
or
talking about.
community business. So, I don't know, I feel like this is a slippery slope. I mean, does it come down to, what other type of business do we regulate like this? Tattoo parlors, maybe?
No, adult businesses.
Adult businesses.
Okay.
And the specific request from the health department was buffering from schools. That was the specific request. I think what's in your materials are examples of what other places have done. And in fact, in talking about the distances from schools, part of it was distances from newly constructed schools. Can't do anything about what's already there. Now, of course, this conversation happened before the legislature made the change that, you've got to be 21 to be able to go into those places. But of course, that's will that happen? Will that not happen? I don't know.
Has anybody got a problem with the
but-
2,000 feet?
In her request, or the request from the health department was 1,000 feet.
Yeah. And the other piece of this is how you permit those. do you permit those as a use by right, or do you permit those as a conditional, or conditional zoning bid?
If we
Right.
did it, if we permitted by conditional zoning, couldn't we accomplish both at the same time?
You could,
That's what I was thinking of conditional.
you certainly could.
But wouldn't we still have to have a distance, and we couldn't make it up as part of the conditional
What are the
zoning?
conditions?
No, I mean, you could have a prescribed distance, or you could leave it open and we could simply,
I'm just trying to see both sides of the coin from a business owner standpoint, and I agree with the health department. I would like to keep any of that as far away from our children as we can for as long as we can. But I'm thinking if we just do a distance, and what is to say it's not, 500 feet this way that you're never going to see from the school, and then are we infringing on business owner rights versus if we just do conditional, kind of like we did with that particular new construction building, we were like, if you can't tell us that it's not going to be one of these, then we don't want to approve it, knowing it's sitting beside a daycare and a dance studio. Does that make sense?
That makes better sense now that you said that.
Well, I'm just thinking, I'm thinking of, for instance, all the buildings back there behind Lowe's Foods. Directionally, as the crow flies, they're going to fall within this, but you can't even drive by and see the front of those not Lowe's Foods, Lowe's Home Improvement, all those businesses that are back there. You wouldn't be able to drive by and see that there's one back there, but as the crow flies, it would apply. And so would that not be a better,
Or as the student walks?
yeah?
Yeah, then they will walk.
The one thing that we did want to mention is that with the down zoning regulation, we would need to be very careful with just reducing a permitted use like that. So that's something that we would need to take into consideration. Chad, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, that's right. I think what the down zoning legislation says, you can't reduce the number of permitted uses in a particular zoning district. So there's ways we could potentially add uses that are not currently, is it just allowed in commercial districts currently?
yes.
Well, that's what I'm saying, we would add a use, right?
Well, it's already permitted as a retail use, right?
Yes.
Currently?
That's a retail.
We're further defining it and then restricting
We're
it.
further defining it, and
Right.
you could be
Defining it as an
restricted
adult and then restricting it to only where other adult services are?
No, the adult businesses, the terminology has changed from the 90s. Those used to be referred to as sexually oriented businesses, but now they're called adult establishments. Those are allowed to be treated a little bit differently under the law. With regards to this, what we've got to be careful of is that we're not reducing the number of permitted uses that would get us to some downzoning issues, which is why I think we suggested perhaps the buffering as opposed to saying that it's only vape shops with regards to conditional rezoning or that sort of thing. But we can think of some other uses likely that could go with that, that could make that work.
What was the health director's
1,000.
recommendation?
A 1,000-foot buffer from newly established schools is what she was requesting.
Does anybody have a problem with just?
I'm good with that.
And then expand on what you're talking about there.
I mean, daycares, schools, I can see they're going, daycares, the students are not walking from a daycare
We hope not.
to the, now, teenage workers might walk there, but yeah. Yeah, I'm good with the health department.
Okay, all right.
For now, yeah, we'll see what,
But we're on legally defensible ground by setting a distance, buffer distance.
we'll find out.
I don't think you're prohibiting the use, you're regulating where the use can go. Whether or not that decreases the development density, I don't think so. I think it's a much more legally defensible argument on the buffer requirement.
Surprised the General Assembly hadn't weighed in unless they weighed in everything else.
Well, and there were some changes with the new laws that have just come out in the past couple weeks related to vape shops. It did not go as far as what some folks in public health or law enforcement wanted to see, but it was a step in the direction of public safety, health, and welfare.
Yes.
All right, anything else for the good? I'm not gonna do board comments, we'll do that tonight, but if anyone's got anything they'd like to add.
I had a couple, one is easy.
Yeah.
Could you take this not marked up version and make that into something a little more presentable for the public to consume, and if you wanted to put totals at the bottom, what 19 and below would look like, and what the rest would look like.
Certainly.
That would be, and I guess you need below 19 and then 50 and above, so we would have our numbers in the administrative numbers too. The other thing that, I was gonna throw this in there for future discussion is, I know we have small, medium, large parks, open space for our subdivisions, and I would like for us to consider using fee in lieu of those. I mean, the subdivisions I've seen, depends on the HOA, but those interior parks tend to deteriorate fairly quickly and typically consist of little playgrounds and stuff. I'd much rather see subdivision contribute with a fee in lieu and us build regional parks that will serve a lot more people in the subdivision, but
And us have the oversight for it
yes.
and manage it.
Yes. So,
Want to look, pull back on,
yeah, I mean, I would like to
Parks.
incentivize, since we've used that word today and cringed, but
Incentivize
somehow
fee in
incentivize, yeah, fee in lieu rather than
Well,
open space.
and
'Cause I've
there
seen it
is-
done well in a few cases, and I've seen much more done poorly.
yeah, and there's, of course, with the greenways, and this is not related necessarily to parks, but greenways, we do have language in there that's concerning reservation versus dedication, and even sometimes construction.
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely see,
On
I mean,
where greenways are, and where the greenway plan is applied, so we'll certainly.
yeah, and I would like to see I mean, if they can construct those, that would be nice to be able to start putting sections together on that, so. But anyway, that's the only thing that I'm scribbling on my paper.
That's all I have for you.
All right, anything else for the good of the order? Good work session. Thank you,
Amen.
everyone, for participating. I think we got to the finish line, and we'll hear from the public and get their input and then reconsider.
Got a schedule for when the draft may come out.
Yeah, Bryce, do you want to come back to give us the schedule when the draft may come out for the public?
Given what we talked about.
Yeah, given what we talked about here, that's a good point.
So basically, I'm
They're
gonna
looking
look at
away.
the consulting thing, because they're gonna do the majority of the heavy lifting there. But obviously, we'll get to work on it right away, make these changes. And I would say, obviously, we're hitting a deadline anyway with the September 9th, community drop-in session. And we don't wanna lose that date, because the use of the facility is gonna narrow for us. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just ultimately, how much time do we want the public to have? I mean, we can aim to have something,
We committed that we would allow them 30 days of review time when it came out.
yeah.
Well, so we're not holding to 30 days being the maximum. So it'll be available for review at any point from the time we post it until we get to public hearing and adoption, and not saying they're the same.
And that's on.
So
And can you repeat again, what day was the public hearing?
we had the public hearing for the month of November. We had originally scheduled for the first week of November, that first month we made.
But and then the drop-in session, what day was that?
Drop-in session September 9th.
I just think it's
Would be
important that
excellent.
we produce a product and give it to the citizens so they have ample time to review it and
Agreed.
and
I'd say at
understand it,
least
and ask questions ahead of time if they choose to do so.
Yes.
I say at least a week before, if not two.
So I think that we can get it to you by Tuesday latest next week, it's like a week.
Perfect.
Mhm.
That's what I was
Yeah.
saying.
And
2
then
weeks. at least.
y'all review it again before it goes public, and then we'll just go from there, obviously with the caveat that the landscape buffer isn't finalized.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
And you would redline that so we can look at it very quickly.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, very good. Anything else? I'll
Move
entertain it.
adjourned, Mr. Chairman.
All right, motion second, all in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Board is adjourned.